Okay, so we can have a discussion on that. I'd like to have a report come from city staff in dealing with that, so I'm dealing with bylaw and staff on that as well right at the moment.
Okay, if we have a discussion, does that mean that during that discussion I can propose my motion and that can be voted on, or should I do that now?
So, Ms. Lowe, some guidance on that?
Through your worship, so do you have a written copy of the resolution right now? So what I would suggest is it gets handed up to council. Council votes on whether or not it comes forward at the next meeting.
Okay, is there a reason it can't be done at this meeting?
Well, because nobody's prepared.
But in the procedural bylaws, it does allow for that, right?
It allows for preparation, so you can hand it out to council, and council can do a...
But we could vote on it to discuss it today if we wanted, right?
Yes, well, it's all about preparation, right, too. Is there a report with it? Do you have a report?
No, I don't. I did not write a report.
Yeah, so council can do that. Council can bring forward council resolutions with reports. But to make a resolution on something where there's not any information, I wouldn't advise.
I think I'd like to still at least put it out there and see how people feel, and then maybe if we decide that there needs to be more information, then we can make that decision, but I'd still be interested in handing it out and seeing what other councillors and the mayor have to say.
Okay, so at this point, point of order, Ms. Lowe, we need to see the resolution to see if we want to discuss that before we move forward. So do you have copies for everybody?
I sure do.
Okay.
Is that the normal process? If we have an item we would like to discuss, it has to be presented in a notice and reviews?
Well, it would be good to have a report of it.
Or is that
Yeah.
just is that standard procedural in all municipalities, or is it just our...
The council procedure bylaw.
So we have the option to review that, though, is that correct? We can fix that if we wanted to have a round table of certain items, or just open the discussion, additions to the agenda. Could we amend our bylaws or our Revelstoke bylaws to accept discussion?
We would have to follow the local government.
Well, we can change, as long as it meets our
As long
bylaws.
as we meet the
We
legislation.
dictate our local bylaws, right? We want to have a round table discussion in our meetings.
As long as it meets the legislation, yes.
Yeah, so late agenda items that might be important to us, we can bring up and just say, can we discuss it at a meeting?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Because I would like to do something similar regarding parking in the bylaw that we have in place in our city. I sent it in an email to council and the CAO in a previous note. I just think that's one item that's been on my radar for a number of months now, and we just haven't had it on the agenda. So I'm wondering how I get it on the agenda.
Well, we can get it on the agenda by asking for a report from staff. So if they have some information on that, so that we can actually have a wholesome conversation on it, and I think that would be the prudent thing to do, then we can actually move something
So
forward.
can I ask that for the next meeting?
Ms. Lowe?
You could put forward a resolution to the corporate officer, myself, yes.
Okay, and I can do the same for plastics?
Yeah.
Okay, so for the next meeting, I think I've done that in the past. I've asked it for it to be on the agenda, and it hasn't been put there.
You're going to work with Don to come up with the motion.
Yeah, so do I have to create a notice of motion?
That's the proper way to do it, yes.
Or that's just Revelstoke's way? Under
It's your way.
Procedural bylaw right
Under Revelstoke's procedure that we implement.
Revelstoke's council
now.
bylaw.
Have to be submitted by the...
Okay, so I'll create a notice, but for right now, I'll create a notice of motion for the next council meeting that I would like to, some report from our administration on parking and on plastics, and a recommendation to move forward on reducing our plastic consumption.
Has to be in writing.
Okay.
So we will talk, council.
And we'll help you to get that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll help you
Okay.
get it.
Okay, so everyone read this motion that Councillor Ryan would like to put on. I've received several emails on this, and I've been talking with most of the proponents, and want to talk with our bylaw people, also talking with Councillor Charlotte earlier today, and talking about discussing this with our Melissa Hemphill and our food recovery people. So I prefer to actually do that before we bring this to light. I'm seeing all kinds of stuff on social media on this, and in talking with our staff, I'm seeing some things that aren't quite as open as they should be, some things that have brought forward that city have been dealing with for a long time. So I feel that we should actually have a proper report and deal with this at that time. But I want some input from other councillors. Councillor Ryan, you brought this forward, so I'm going to ask you to speak first to this.
Yeah, sure. In this motion that I put forward, one of the points is to have a staff report. So that would be part of this motion. I've heard a lot of community members just mention that they are having issues with this problem and that they've tried to contact the city and work with the city to try and get some bylaws amended, and that hasn't happened. And so some of these issues are really very timely for some of the community members, and so I thought it would make most sense to actually have a motion that we can get behind and have staff allocate the resources to putting the work into this important food security issue.
Okay, so Councillor Birchfield, any comment?
I'm happy with discussing and voting on this motion today.
Okay. Councillor Charlotte.
Yeah, we talked about this earlier today. This is something that I've been talking with Marianne Wade about in the past. There's an urban agriculture bylaw proposal from Melissa Hemphill, so I was interested to find out if there had been conversation and how do we leverage the staff person to be able to better further our relationship with those in the community that are growing food. I was pushing on this in the spring because I was concerned about what would happen this year because of COVID and the pandemic, that I knew there was going to be issues. I was expecting that. I was told that it would be brought to the Recovery Task Force to discuss how food security issues can be handled in this year, but I did not hear anything back. I don't know if there was any conversation at that table, what any recommendations would be.
Okay. So the question is, are you guys prepared to make a motion or actually do this without having some background information from staff as to what the issues are? Because what you've seen on social media may not be exactly what the issues are, and so this sort of stuff that I see in front of me has been reinforced by other people sending me emails, but also on posts that I've seen on social media. And when I speak to staff, it's not exactly as cut and dried as this. So that's a question I have. Councillor Juncker.
Yeah, two things. Yeah, I think that's really a valid point. It's always best to get the information. Like, obviously, there's going to be 2-3 sides to the story.
Correct.
I think my only concern was seeing how this kind of blew up this weekend with social media, and just personally, the amount of emails I've seen is the concern that there's several people that have pending tickets, big tickets coming within the next week. So that report's not going to come to us to make a decision before that happens, right? So I guess the bylaw, as Councillor Shuley indicated, which was, yeah, I was really looking at, and I agree, and I think this pandemic has really illustrated the lack of food security that we have here. So I'm happy to have a discussion around this topic. I think we need to have that discussion today to figure out if we're going to wait for a report, do we have a temporary hold so we can know, because ultimately council should be deciding on what direction we want to go with this bylaw. And I guess where I personally have struggled this weekend is, as I spoke to one of the bylaw officers, that I think Councillor Ryan did a really good job, and I tried to as well, reiterating to the public that this shouldn't be, I don't like when they attack the bylaw officers and say, oh, the bylaw is so lazy or blah, blah, blah. The issue should not be with the actual officers. The issue should be with council and with the actual bylaw itself. They're just doing their job enforcing a bylaw that they've been told to enforce. It's just whether or not this council, per se, supports that bylaw, and if we need to amend it to that better works for our community.
Okay, so I'm just gonna reiterate, when we're dealing with these sort of things, they're not cut and dried. And so when we're talking about livestock, are we talking about chickens? Are we talking about goats? Are we talking about cows? Are we talking about pigs? And so when I ask those sorts of questions, I've had all kinds of things happen over the summer with people who've had all kinds of those types of livestock on an area that doesn't support that sort of thing, and trying to work with land use planning and trying to work with bylaw. Now, some of these people who've said that, my issue, I've got 5 days, 6 days, 2 weeks to get it done, and in essence, they've actually been working with bylaw for the last 3 to 6 months. I look at that and go, it's easy to get people on Facebook to support you when it looks like our bylaw people are doing an injustice, when in actuality they've been working with the proponent for a long time to try to figure that out. And so before we have reports, I'm really concerned about us delving into that issue. Having said that, I know that there are some tickets that are supposed to be due, and maybe that sort of thing, bylaw can talk to those people and just put them on hold until this issue is dealt with, but I need some guidance from Ms. Lowe regarding that.
Your Worship, I don't recommend this goes forward right now. This needs a thorough review by staff.
Okay.
For implications, some of these tickets have been in effect for years, months. We don't have boundaries here. This is putting into place something that needs to be reviewed by staff prior to. I guess maybe what I would need, it's just my advice, and what I would need would be more information on this. So a late item that comes forward in the form of a resolution can be added. Yes, can be added to the agenda. However, there should be information with it or background to it so council can make an informed decision. So there's really, I get the intent of this and it's a good idea, except for there's no background information for council to make an informed decision on.
And no reports of things that I've asked of staff to prepare for. So I've had people send me emails, and I've asked today to get those reports as to what's transpired, so we have some background, so we can actually deal with some of those issues.
And what are the implications coming forward for, so it says how the city can streamline rezoning process for property owners in rural residential areas that want to rezone their lots to permit having food-generating animals. These are all very large requests, and they affect a lot more than just one bylaw. And it's not like it's not doable, and we are dealing with COVID, so we could move faster in certain circumstances. But I would strongly recommend this is reviewed by council. By staff.
Ms. Ryan.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I'm hearing two things a lot from everybody. The first is that there's obviously urgency in this issue for a lot of our community members. This is their livelihood. It is complicated, but it also doesn't appear that there has been a lot of, they're working with these community members, but how are they working with them? Are they working against them? Are they working to help them find ways to make it appropriate for them to have those food-generating animals in their life if it's in an appropriate place with the appropriate restriction? And I'm hearing that it's a complicated issue. I understand that, but I'm also hearing that there's been a lot of talk about this and a lot of good intentions and not a lot of action. So the way that I've written this motion is quite open-ended in that I'm not looking for every single part of this to be, perfect, because I don't have all the background information, but at least there are deliverables and a timeline associated with it so that we are acknowledging to the community that food security is an important issue for us and that we are taking action to improve this, and that the people who are being impacted by these issues at a time where we are facing a global pandemic and food security has never been more of a priority, that we are acknowledging that importance and taking action. So for me, this is a signal, and also a signal to the community that we are doing something about this, and also a way to help these individuals who are struggling. And I've clearly laid out that this wouldn't be like something that people downtown who after today's date are like, oh, they're allowing livestock, I'm going to get a goat. Like, of course, there have to be restrictions, and that's why I've left it the way that it is, and I wouldn't want this to go on forever, and that's why I've asked for a report and for the bylaws to be amended accordingly.
And so is it not better to have the report on the situation that we have before we start amending bylaws?
I agree that we would never amend the bylaw without getting the report. That's why the report is requested first in this motion. But I also think that because the urgency of it impacting current residents that are facing huge fines, that we should be taking action now to at least put things on hold. It's not saying that we're making any rash decisions. This motion is very much like we need to just take a step back, see what the situation is, get the information. It is very complicated, make a decision. But before we do that, why are we impacting residents? Because it's entirely possible that the bylaws that we end up amending end up allowing for those types of uses, and now we've fined a bunch of people who otherwise wouldn't have been fined.
So I get what you're saying, but the fines are put in under the existing bylaw. Having said that, is there a way that we can put this in abeyance as far as the due dates on the fines until we get a proper report in this one?
No, Your Worship, there's not. What we could talk about is, I would suggest this would definitely go to the task recovery force for sure, for review. But I think that maybe what you're trying to accomplish here is that during COVID, when food resilience is something that this council feels strongly about and we don't have the ability to do what we can normally do, can we allow people to have livestock in all zonings? Is that what you're saying? Or just zonings in rural areas? Because
So it's subject to the points I've laid out here, that the owners submit a statement to the state. So I should probably just read it for anybody who's watching and listening, because they have no idea what we're talking about.
absolutely. That's
Okay,
right.
so whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the importance of having a resilient local food system, be it resolved that bylaw enforcement immediately cease issuing tickets and not enforce conformance of existing properties that have livestock in zoning areas that do not currently allow for this use, providing that 1, the owner submits a written statement to the city justifying the benefit of the animals to their to their food sources. 2, the owner has had animals before the date that this motion is being made, i.e. residents wishing to get livestock for their property after today will not be permitted and will still be subject to ticketing. 3, no substantiated claims have been received by the city of Revelstoke from neighbors of the subject property regarding the humane treatment and safety of the animals. And that this temporary lift on enforcement remain in place until staff provide a report before January 30th, 2021, outlining 1, how the city can streamline the rezoning process for property owners in rural residential areas that want to rezone their lots to permit food-generating animals, and 2, the necessary bylaw changes to accomplish what the community wants to allow, determined after consultation.
So this is in essence, you are wanting to allow a permitted use that's not a use in a zone. So it's a rezoning. So it is required to have public consultation. That's right. There's a lot more to it.
Well, it's not so much a change in use as it is a direction for bylaw not to enforce certain parts of their certain bylaws
But they're-
in this pandemic.
So they're enforcing because of complaints from the residents. So they're enforcing the bylaws that this council has in place right now.
So that's, Councillor Juncker.
Just a question. Or did you want to? I saw your hand up.
Go ahead.
Just a question. I completely understand where you're coming from, because then you theoretically, council would be permitting a non-conforming use to take place. Yeah, illegally.
Without public consultation.
Right. I guess my question is, we're already doing that for other things, though. We don't enforce illegal vacation rentals. There's hundreds of them in town in non-conforming uses that we have not enforced since day one of our council sitting, and wasn't enforced in the previous council after the latest bylaw had been done where it was zoned. We're not enforcing it. And there's been hundreds and hundreds of complaints
So-
the bylaw receives, and it's not enforced.
Okay. Councillor Shillette, did you have a comment?
I agree with the intent of this motion. The idea that this is, again, what I brought up earlier this summer in conversations, where we have these bylaws in place, and I get it takes time. We do not have the capacity to deal with these bylaws as soon as we would like. But growing our own food and having that ability to grow and generate the food for our own families is a huge value for our community. I was told that it was going to be part of the neighborhood planning process to look at what this looks like for the big picture. I don't know that I feel comfortable with the wording of this particular motion, but I'm firmly in support of a notice of motion to have this conversation, to bring Melissa Hemphill to the table, to have, what does this look like? And how do we address this as fast as possible? Because as Councillor Ryan points out, this is coming to a head around us, and we haven't been able to have as many conversations as I think we would have liked to over the summer. I would like to hear what the conversation was at the Recovery Task Force. If there was one already, maybe this has already been started, because I brought it up back in August. But off the cuff, I get it. This is going to be hard to discuss. We've already talked about this for 20 minutes now on something that we don't have enough information for. So I think I would be more supportive of a notice of motion for our next meeting, but to make sure that we get some stuff done between now and then in those conversations, so that our food security coordinator can support our local growers the way her job is intended.
Okay, I'm supportive of a notice of motion, and then we have a background report on that. Ms. Braun, you're in the audience here. Recovery Task Force, is this something the Recovery Task Force would be willing to look into as well, to give some input back, and what are the timelines with where you meet?
Absolutely. The Recovery Task Force has identified this as a need, and initially put it up forward to council, identified that amongst other issues that we wanted to tackle. I have worked, the CD department has worked with Melissa Hemphill to lay out possible changes to the zoning bylaw, and that has been shared with development services in meetings over the past maybe 6 months or so. So that process has been started. They're having conversations. I'm not sure where it is with development services, but certainly CD supports it. The Recovery Task Force would like to work with development services to see how they can bring forward some options.
Okay. So I'm supportive of this coming forward as a notice of motion, and then we have a background report, and then we can talk about it at the council table. It doesn't support the issue that people already have because they've been dealing with bylaw enforcement and their tickets. I'm not about to stand in front of bylaw and say, you know, you haven't done your job, when indeed they have done their job, and they've been very diligent about doing their job. It's easy to go out to social media and make a statement and make everyone look bad. Having said that, I would like to see a report from staff dealing with this and actually discuss it in its wholesome way, and then make a decision moving forward. So, Councillor Ryan.
Just to clarify, I was never insinuating that bylaw wasn't doing their job. I think it's clear that we have these bylaws in place and they're simply enforcing them. I think it's just a matter of what issues they're choosing to enforce. And in this case, seeing as there are other bylaws that don't get enforced, I'm wondering if we can do a similar turning of a blind eye, given that there are residents in the community who are being impacted by this. And I'm wondering if we don't go ahead in making any action today, and if we do a notice of motion, whether there would be recourse if we end up altering the bylaws in a way that would then permit these people to continue doing things the way they are doing now after they've paid fines. Like, is there any recourse?
My consideration is possibly, what about the people that are complaining about the livestock in residential areas? What about those people? What about their voice? What about the people that don't want livestock beside them because they bought a residential lot?
And what I would say to that is that in this motion, it's clearly supposed to be a temporary solution in terms of us being able to figure out what that looks like and who would be able to be allowed, and in which area they'd be able to have different types of livestock, and that they wouldn't be, their complaints wouldn't be dismissed entirely. It's just that given that we're in a pandemic, we're prioritizing food security, and that we want to do it correctly and not work against them. That's what I would say to those residents.
And where are the lines drawn? Is it R1, R2, R4?
Well, similar to what was done with the chicken coop piece where it was integrated, you'd have to look at how that works, and that's, obviously above my knowledge, but that's where the staff report would come in and suggesting where it would be appropriate. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that people be doing this downtown, but
To integrate livestock into residential areas and what that looks like and how to contain it and how to protect essentially the neighbors that are around you as well.
exactly.
So, and that definitely would be a staff report that would come forward. It would also have to go through a public process.
And I think we need to do the staff report before we put the cart before the horse in dealing with this at this point. That's my opinion. Councillor Juncker.
Yeah, Your Worship, I just want to take a step back here, and I think we might be diving into it a little bit too much in the sense that I think what this is meant to be, when we talk about the illegal vacation rentals in town that don't get enforced, to be fair, the neighbors complain about those too. And the neighbors deserve their say on that too, and they haven't been had it. And yes, that process is starting now, but it's taken 2 to 3 years. I think what this should be viewed as is a similar thing that, as our Director of Development Services has said, that we needed to have a report come forward to make that bylaw proper for what works for the community. I think this is similar, that we need a report from staff to make sure that this bylaw works for the community. But in the meantime, and it's indicated here, I think it said, January. In the meantime, I think what we should be doing, in my opinion, I agree with Councillor Ryan and Brooks Hill that we just should not be, basically a freeze until that staff report comes forward, and then we can make decisions. Just like we've done with the illegal vacation rentals. We have not taken any substantive action on those, which is, so I think that's what we need to do, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's kind of what this is asking for, is let's just freeze what we're doing until we get a staff report. Don't go hand out any more tickets, kind of thing.
Mr. Simon.
Let's wait for that report.
Okay, Mr. Simon, you want to weigh in?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just quickly, there are lots of implications here that would impact the process as it relates to development services, public hearing requirements, whether or not a use is permitted within a specific zone. There's issues here that would impact corporate services through enforcement bylaws, and there's issues that are currently underway with economic development. And I think if staff, this is the first that Development Services is hearing of this notice of motion, if the intent is to bring a report forward by January 30th, 2021, staff would want to ensure that the notice of motion is crafted in a way that reflects what the current situation is. This is the lay of the land, so that we're targeting the objectives and the concerns that council and the community are having, so we're bringing back an accurate report. So
Yeah, I think that's
from the
really
development
fair.
services side, we would want to have a more clear understanding of this notice of motion, potentially some input to make sure that the notice of motion is crafted in a way that is addressing the concerns that council is bringing to the table today.
Okay, Councillor Brooks Hill.
I would, thank you, Mr. Simon. I would be in favor of the first part being voted on today for the freeze on the current situation, and then if Councillor Ryan wanted to work with Development Services to come up with a notice of motion for the next meeting regarding the moving forwards.
Okay, so Councillor Ryan, we'll get Councillor Ryan to work with the CAO on a motion in conjunction with Development Services. That's how it would work. Okay,
So basically what we've done is we've had this as part of the agenda because the discussion was, are we going to actually adopt? So what we need to do is adopt the agenda with this, then we can have a motion, and then we'll talk.
Okay, so we'll go back to it. So we had put the motion on the table, so you get what you want. We're going to get by-election, plus we're going to discuss. No, don't. It's okay. We get to deal with this. Okay, my apologies for the words. Okay, so now I need. Someone want to move the agenda? Councillor Sherlatt, seconded by Councillor Juncker. All those in favor? Okay, so before we go any further, I want to go on to adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting of September 22nd, 2020. Councillor Sherlatt, Councillor Brooks Hill, all in favor? Motion's carried. Any business arising from those minutes? Councillor Sherlatt.
I just wanted to follow up on the comment around the reports from UBCM. I'm assuming that the provincial cycle. I'm glad to be getting back to work and continue to push this forward with a majority NDP government. I hope that we can see this work get done in an efficient way. I'm happy to be part of that. So including the work with Minister Robinson, if she continues to hold that spot, but then also whoever becomes the Minister of Flynn Road to look at protection of Mount Baby and our land use planning process. But I just wanted to check and see if we had heard anything back on those, any details or clarity about that water grant, or if everything's just been on hold because of the election.
We haven't heard anything once the dissolution of government, nothing further has come forward. So we haven't heard anything further. And then dealing with the community impetus as far as dealing with Mount Baby. So Ms. Braun and I have spoken briefly about that and about the community being involved. And as you heard from former Minister Donaldson, stating that as long as we have a community-led way of going forward for protection, that there will be some supports for us, and we'll be dealing with Carport and the Flynn Rose staff regarding that.
I look forward to the chance to be involved.
All right, Councilor Juncker.
Yeah, Your Worship, just a question. I was just curious if the construction at the visitor center has started.
Yes, it has, I believe. But Ms. Braun?
Yes, construction began last week. They were working on the upstairs floor as well as the downstairs floor, and things are progressing quickly.
Thanks. Awesome. Thank you.
Any further comments on business arising from the minutes? Okay, I'm going to go on to item 4B as we talked about, and then we will do 4C in with Councillor Ryan's motion. So 4B, by-election. So Ms. Lowe, if you could just give us some input on that, please.
I just wanted to give council some information with respect to the by-election, and I apologize for not being at the last meeting. But, so what we're going to require is a ministerial order to have our by-election, because we are going to change our elections bylaw just as a one-time thing. And what I want to talk to council about is expanded. So there's a few different things that we're going to change. They don't suggest that you change your bylaw, amend your bylaw for a one-off, but they do put together a ministerial order. And this is if nothing else changes with the election and whatnot, but they will put together an order that I will bring to council that council can adopt. But the order, from working with the ministry right now, what we've decided, and I would just like basically the proverbial head nod, but the mail-in ballot eligibility. So the mail-in ballot eligibility in our current bylaw is that you have to be sick or not able or out of town. And from what all the other municipalities have done, and I'm pretty sure, although I would like your direction, is do you want the mail-in ballot eligibility to be given to everybody so that they have the ability to do mail-in without having to be out of town or having to be sick? I was pretty sure that would be something you would be into. Okay, yeah. And then,
Question on that. Does it extend the decision time?
What do you mean by decision?
Well, I gathered from the previous, this recent election, the decision is 3 weeks down the road. We won't have a final count on the ballots until 3 weeks after the 24th.
well, we don't have quite that many ballots.
No, I know, but what are you anticipating?
Well, if we continue to use the electronic, we should be able to feed them all in that evening and have.
The other ballots had to be cut off a week ahead of time or something?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then hopefully a decision will be made very close to the election date.
Yes, that is the intent, yeah. And then the use of a provincial voters list. So we right now require sign-in when you come in, so that you have to show us ID, and then we would. And so the touch points are quite extensive, and the government recommends that we reduce touch points. So our bylaw says that we do it with ID, and we could ask the ministry to let us use the provincial voters list. It would just probably protect the people working there a little bit more. So,
Another question.
I was just going to ask, so if you're registered to vote, then you'll be on that list.
Yeah.
And then there would just be another process if you weren't registered to register there.
yeah, or early registration as well.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So, again, the most recent election, we just had to show up with our driver's license and our card. Now, is that any different what we have?
We don't have cards, so local government doesn't have cards.
So
So
we
we
would have-
have a list that the province gives to us, which should be quite current now. because
Yeah.
So that we just cross it off.
Right.
Yeah.
So the touch points were behind the glass screen there. There was no touch. Basically, they gave you a card, you fill it in and put it in the box.
And they
So what touch
scanned
point?
your-
Yeah.
yeah.
So the touch points were very minimal as far as I saw, observed in this one. So I'm just kind of curious.
Well, you would have to produce 2 types of identification to sign up to be on the list. You have to write them in, solemnly swear,
Yeah.
a declaration.
But I don't
whereas you
think
could-
the participant, there was any touch points. There was any, I mean, this is all done behind
Holding them
glass.
up, yeah.
So I don't know if it's being overzealous on our part, but doing
No,
that
the
work.
province recommends that we use
Yeah.
a provincial mailing list.
So it worked on the previous one, so why could we not adopt the same one? Or I would recommend we
Well, we don't have cards, we need the voter list, we can adapt it, but for those who are not registered, be a little different process.
That makes it easier.
Yes, oh yeah, it doesn't exclude them.
Okay.
They would still be able to sign up, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So the other one is that council can enable the chief election officer not to hold any special voting opportunities. So in our bylaw, it says that we must hold special voting opportunities. Special voting opportunities are in for senior citizens' homes and the people that are actually, we're not really allowed to go into homes like that, so the mail-in ballot would be what we would offer, but our bylaw says we must. So in the ministerial order, we can relax that to May, if you guys are okay with that. You give the CEO the...
So it's just temporary, these changes are just temporary. Yeah, sounds good.
Do you vote on it, or we're good?
No, I'm just kind of like making sure if you had a really strong feeling against it, then we could talk about it. Okay. And then I don't think we're going to need this to change the number of locations or advanced voting opportunities. We have 2 voting opportunities in advance of the voting date. So it would be the Wednesday before general voting day and then the Wednesday before that as well. And from discussions with the ministry, that would probably be sufficient for 1 councillor. And then we could also ask them to allow for oral declarations. You know how you said your oral declaration instead of signing, so that's less pens, less paper, less touch points. So those were the 4 things that I identified in the bylaw, and the ministry said not a problem. So I'll bring those forward in a ministerial order if that's good with you. And then the other thing I wanted to discuss was dates. So we have to have the election 80 days after appointment of your chief elections officer. So my recommendation is that we appoint a chief election officer sometime in November, because that will bring a general voting day, when I use the calendars that the ministry provides, to January the 30th. Saturday would be general voting day. That also takes the campaign period and everything else out of the Christmas holidays, which they support as well. So the report that will come forward will be recommending a chief elections officer in November, and the ministerial order will already be underway, so that will come forward right after for council's resolution.
You guys all okay with that?
Yeah. Just 80 days, we can shorten it? I mean, we choose less than...
Well, you have to have certain time for the mail-in ballots. You have to have 80 days is a short turnover from announcement of election.
I think the candidate gets 30 days to even choose if they want to sign up or something.
Well, and there's nomination period
Yeah, that's what I
and
mean,
all
yeah.
that notification that we have to do in the papers. It's a tight turnaround, and resources are tight right now at City Hall. So I would recommend that we do the full 80 days. And it's not challenged. Yeah.
As long as we actually know what's going on now. So just to clarify, so the one report will come forward recommending the appointment of the chief elections officer in November,
Yeah.
and then at the following council meeting, the ministerial order comes? Or is it
Unless I
vice
can bring
versa?
them both at the same time, but
Oh, okay.
I don't know if the ministry is going to be able to work that fast, but I have been in discussions with
Right,
them,
but we
so-
definitely, the chief elections officer will come in November.
Yes,
And one of
in order for us to make those deadlines, it will
Yeah.
have to.
Yeah, as long as we're doing that, I support that.
Okay.
Councilor Elliott, did you?
Rough cost?
I'm sorry.
Rough cost?
50 grand.
60.
How is this growing?
No. Roughly, we have a little bit, let me back this up. When we normally do an election, I hold, as a chief elections officer, I have held elections and I've collected money from the school district because I've held their election, as well as the Columbia-Shuswap Regional District, I've held their elections, so we can offset our costs. So our costs come in at $25,000 in the budget. However, in reality, they are closer to 50. So this will not be as big of an election as if we were doing all of council and mayor and council, and I will try and reduce the staffing as much as I can. And the good news is that if the province isn't seeing where you need more time and more dates and people are using the mail-in, that's where we'll focus the money on. So anywhere between $25,000 and $40,000 is probably what it will cost the taxpayer for this election.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Elliott, did you have a comment?
No, municipal order, like municipal affairs, the provincial, that's what they...
Ministry of Municipal Housing and Affairs, yes. Affairs and Housing, yeah.
So that means when people give out their Christmas cards in December, they can also give out their vote for me.
I guess. Okay, that's pretty much all we need to
No
discuss on
campaigning
that.
until January. January 2nd, I believe, campaign
So it'll
dates.
be Happy New Year cards.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and if that's okay with council, I'll move forward with those.
Great.
All right.
I'll give you some guidance. Thank you, council. Okay, we're going to move on to item 4C, which is Councillor Ryan's motion. Do we want to have a brief discussion on this further, or just bring this motion forward? How do we feel with this?
So, Your Worship, the way I understood it was council was good with putting a freeze on enforcement with respect to livestock. Current freeze, and then we were going to bring forward a moral motion.
So I would just say that, as Councillor Robideaux had mentioned, the first part, that doesn't require a report, since that will be coming with the notice of motion. So basically from the first word whereas until the end of the third bullet point, just because that at least maintains some enforcement capabilities if there are issues that deal with like inhumane treatments of animals. Like, we don't want to not be able to enforce really terrible complaints. So I think that would be good. But that's just my recommendation.
Or is that a decision bylaw can just make?
Inhumane treatment is...
It's mandatory. It's mandatory.
Yeah.
So I'm comfortable supporting a notice of motion with Councillor Ryan, working with Ms. Lowe and Development Services to bring back at a meeting with a good report on like kind of thing. Because yeah, you're right. It will definitely need public consultation to figure out what do we want to achieve here. As long as we're being told then the enforcement's just being put off, then I'll support it.
So, Your Worship, I believe...
On current ones.
Yeah, current. We
Yeah,
can't
because if somebody comes downtown at that, in this condo and suddenly puts 5 cows in it,
Yeah.
then I'm not gonna,
So to me, this is just a service level request from council.
Yeah, but it does very much include like not enforcing the conformance for issued tickets that have already been sent out.
Yeah, which we cannot do.
Okay, so then that's not what I'm trying to accomplish.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, it's great if we can cease the like crackdown or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
That helps in the future, but it doesn't help the people who are already being targeted. Is a hard word to use because it's just bylaw doing their job, but targeted in this instance.
So basically, we can't go back and quash tickets. That's not our capability,
Can we
correct?
extend deadlines?
Just a question, so we extend it.
Let's just ask one question at a time, Council, then we'll get to you.
The tickets are governed provincially. They're governed by the province, so the dates are all set on the back of the tickets.
But we're the ones
respect
who
for
are providing
enforcement.
them, right? Like, it's our bylaws. Surely that's up to the city.
No. And that's what I mean. I would need more time to look into what this actually entailed.
Okay, is there a way that we can get
What we can do is we can talk to bylaw enforcement and ask them to not actively enforce at this moment as we're in COVID as a request from council. But the backdated, I would have to look into what that entails. I don't even have an answer for
So
you.
you can report back to us on that one then? And then you would direct bylaw to...
Councillor, you had a question.
So the gist of it, like there's no, the fines and the tickets that are already established will exist whether the bylaw changes or not. So that's what's problematic, right? The heavy hand that's come down on these people. The significant fine and the from the Facebook or from the emails, it seems like it's a rough road or rough handling that they've received.
Well, I want to be careful on that. It's just one person's opinion.
Yeah, exactly, and I get that. But I think that's the gist of the concern for this here, is we need to change our bylaw. If we come out and say, okay, we want to allow livestock, we want to support the local food production, but it doesn't change the ticket issue. They're still subject to these fines, and maybe that's something you're trying to address.
That is, because I'm worried that we'll end up making these adjustments to the bylaws, and that these other people who have been ticketed would, under the amended bylaws, be totally compliant. And it would be okay, like, I would be fine with that if there was some kind of recourse, like, you know, if the bylaw changes and you've been ticketed for this bylaw in the last year, like, I don't know if that's a thing, but like maybe they can apply to the city to get reimbursed for those fees because they are now not breaking the new rules.
Okay. We still need to pay our bylaw enforcement, and we need to do the municipal ticketing system, so we're a little bit stuck with that.
Are you trying to insinuate that we're paying for enforcement by the tickets that we're issuing?
No.
Okay, sorry, I was just clarifying.
Your worship, it is a revenue stream that does contribute to the bylaw enforcement function for sure, but it doesn't.
Of course, but that's not.
We don't get kudos for going out to
That's what I'm
tickets.
trying to say. We're not motivated.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Berkshire, you have your hand up for a while here.
Well, the motion on the table doesn't mention anything about prior tickets.
It does, it's,
Conformance of existing properties. Conformance of existing properties. So
But that's just the existing properties. That's not
That's
saying...
not what she means. You mean the existing.
Yeah, I mean the people who have been issued.
Yes, so as I read this, that it's essentially just a direction to bylaw to not
That's true.
issue more tickets.
That's true.
And it's explicitly stating for existing ones. So if tomorrow, as people have said, someone's not going to go out and buy 5 cows and put them in their yard, that would not qualify.
And so basically, when we look at this motion, we're not going to quash any of the tickets that have already been there, but that doesn't mean we're not going to, you're asking for us to not go out and issue more tickets to those people, correct?
Who already have animals.
So
you're not saying that someone else can go get more.
And then we're not saying that people can go out and get more, other people can go and put 5 cows as...
Yeah, you cannot do that. It's just a cease on the crackdown. But yeah, you're right that it can be interpreted as simply that.
I think that we need to be careful with our language with the crackdown thing, because what it is that bylaw is only, in their defense, operating under city bylaws, and they are only doing complaints. So it's the residents that are complaining about the animals, and they're not permitted uses.
And then why are bylaw enforcing or going and, you know, handing out tickets for people who have illegal vacation rentals?
Well, for vacation rentals, because vacation rentals, we're doing the best we can. So if it's noise or it's parking, we are issuing tickets for those. We don't have a regulatory process right now for vacation rentals. We do for livestock. Do you see the difference?
Well,
Councillor Juncker?
yeah, just to be fair though, you mentioned specifically this low non-conforming use, and an illegal vacation rental is a non-conforming use, so you could theoretically ticket for that. I am aware of a few being ticketed out of the noise, but the usage still is not approved in our under our zoning bylaw. But So, I mean, what I'm understanding from this conversation is that we cannot squash the tickets that have been issued. If you maybe, you can report back just to clarify as you had said, but then I would at least support like not moving forward, do you know what I mean, until we get that report done. If we can't squash the existing tickets, it's really unfortunate, but I don't know the legislation, so if that's what the legislation says. But it would be nice to at least hear back from you on that one. But then I would support the other parts that Councillor Brooksville brought forward, just halting, moving forward, and then looking forward to a good staff report once the motion has been worked with you.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I would just ask too that when we do get that information, that two things in particular be sort of like researched as it applies to the legislation, like whether we can extend deadlines on existing tickets, like if that's something that the municipality can do, and also if not, if there's any recourse for fines that are paid, should the bylaws change.
Okay, so what motion should we put on the table here?
I just
sorry.
it's important that until this report is received, there's no amplification of those fines, like no late fees, no additions to the charge, because right now they're being significantly increased. If you don't pay it on time, or if they're threatened to not pay, there's an extra additional fee. So let's postpone those additional fees until we get this report from the.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So if I may, Your Worship, hypothetically then, if somebody has I'm hypothetically saying they have a $10,000 fine today, we're not going tomorrow and giving them another $1,000 and another $1,000. We're just freezing it. We're not wiping that $10,000 fine, but we're just holding now until we get a proper, solid report from staff.
But if we can do that, I don't understand why we can't just not enforce the fine itself. Is it because it's already been issued?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I'd be happy with that. I think that's a great addition.
Okay, so let's find some clarity here and get this motion on the table so we can move on.
So we need a resolution
Okay,
to,
Yeah, I'll make a resolution. I'm gonna basically just read this first part out, and we should add something in there that mentions what Rob just said. So, or Councillor Elliott. So, so
include the COVID part for sure, because that's gonna make it.
totally, yeah. Well, that's the third word in it. So I also say, whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the importance of having a resilient local food system, be resolved that by law enforcement immediately cease issuing tickets, which would include subsequent tickets and penalties for not paying, and not enforce conformance of existing properties that have livestock in zoning areas that do not currently allow for this use, providing that, one, the owner submits a written statement to the city justifying the benefit of the animals to their food sources, two, the owner has had animals before the date that this motion is being made, i.e. residents wishing to get livestock for their property after today will not be permitted and will still be subject to ticketing, and three, no substantiated complaints have been received by the city of Revelstoke from neighbors of the subject property regarding the humane treatment and safety of the animals. And I can write that.
Yeah, no, I got it. That's good. What about complaints from the public
In what sense?
with respect to odors or?
I think in this case, we're asking for a complete cease because of COVID-19, and we're prioritizing that in the hopes that this new report provides more clarity on what the direction would be when it comes to complaints. But that's just my input.
okay. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Elliott? Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? No. Mayor Sulz opposed. And motion's carried. Okay, so we're going to move on to item 5A, Development Services. Presentation, Mr. Simon.
Thank you, Your Worship. The first application that we have before council today is a development variance permit application This is seeking to vary the rear yard setback requirements as well as parking requirements for a residential property. Here's some background. Subject lands are located at 1121 First Street West. They're zoned residential 2, which is single family and 2-family residential district. Property falls within the multifamily development permit area, currently serviced by municipal water and sanitary. And as you can see in the zoning map here, it is surrounded by other R2 properties. The application before you today specifically seeks to vary the rear yard setback requirement from 7.5 meters to 5.33 meters, and to allow access from Wales and First Street as opposed to the alley. This is to correct an existing siting issue. So it is for a secondary suite that is in an addition at the rear of the property. It is existing, and we'll get into some of the history of it here. So a previous development variance permit was issued by council back in 2018, and a subsequent building permit application was applied for and issued in 2019. It varied the rear yard setback to 6 meters, and it required all parking from the lane. As part of the occupancy permit process, a building location certificate was provided, and it did show that the building was encroaching further into the setback beyond the 6 meters, and the most updated site plan shows it at 5.33 meters. The original variance also required all parking from the laneway. Upon further review at the occupancy permit stage, there were significant constraints to this. This was due to the fact that the incorrect siting in the building made it closer to the laneway. The minimum parking stall length requirement is 5.5 meters. So for a vehicle to actually get in, get out, became very, very difficult and tight. And then as well, the original building permit application did not thoroughly vet out window well implications, walking path implications associated with granting that original variance. So you can see, this is the updated site plan. You can see the existing suite there. It is 5.33 meters from the property line. The applicant has indicated that upon construction, there were challenges with actually identifying the proper boundaries of the property, and that this contributed to the incorrect siting of the addition at the rear. As such, a variance is required to actually allow final occupancy to be granted on site. With respect to parking, it does include a proposal to allow parking off First Street, so 2 stalls off of First Street, and then 1 stall off of Wales. Parking in the immediate area is a mixture of direct access on Wales, direct access on First Street, as well as laneway access. Historically, the lanes had been accessed through a single car on Wales Street there, and to accommodate the required 3 parking stalls on site for the dwelling and the suite, the only feasible parking arrangement, given the siting of that addition at the rear, is to allow direct access from First, and then to allow that historic access from Wales. So because it is a development variance permit application, notification letters do need to be sent to adjacent property owners within a 100-meter radius of the lands. It was sent to 52 property owners. At this time, staff are not aware of any letters in support or opposition of the variance. In terms of the staff evaluation, we are supportive of the variance to the rear yard. It does correct an issue of the existing siting. The addition that contains the secondary suite. Secondary suites are supported within the OCP policies. If the variance is not approved, then this will either have to go before the Board of Variance, or a portion of the building at the rear, which is existing constructed, remember, would need to be removed to meet that 6-meter setback requirement that was previously varied. With respect to access from First and Wales, staff are supportive of the variances required to enable this as well. Access from Wales was existing historically. This portion of First does not experience heavy traffic volumes. There are some constraints with respect to snow removal and management of the laneway. Staff have been working to try and get this laneway plowed as well, but there still are constraints, and if parking is from the rear, there could also be some operation and maintenance constraints for snow removal there, given how tight it would be. And then calculations on the original variance application and the subsequent building permit application did not significantly consider window wells, pathways, or anything else of the such. So there are 3 resolutions for council to consider. The first one would grant the variances for the minimum rear yard and all variances required with respect to access as contained in the zoning bylaw. The second would allow all the variances required as specified in the subdivision development and servicing bylaw. And then the third resolution here, because this is the second variance application for the same development, staff do have a resolution there for council to consider a reduction of fees associated with this application in the amount of 50%. So from $1,100 to $550, and this was due to the fact that fees were previously collected and access issues were not addressed in a meaningful manner with that application, and these fees will be required to be paid prior to issuance of the permit. And staff do know that in the report there is an additional option for council to consider, a full 100% waiver of fees. So I'll put the first resolution back on the board. That does conclude the staff presentation. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Great, thank you, Mr. Simon. So, council, let's get the first part of the resolution on the table, and we can ask questions. Council Burchill.
The development variance permit DVP 2020-11 be approved at 1121 First Street West as on the slide.
All right, is there a second for the motion, please? Councillor Elliott. Any further discussion on the motion, councillors? This has been on our, I've been dealing with this DVP for a while, and I'm supportive of what staff have done to help move these homeowners forward on this, so I'm definitely supportive of this. Any further discussion? Councillor Elliott?
So there was a DD, this is the second development permit this person has gone through on this property.
I don't think it's a second one, it's just a continuation. Is that correct, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, this is a new development variance permit. The original one was from 2017, and this is for something different. So staff are advertising, or notifying the public rather, of something different for this one, and it is to correct a siting issue. So when the building was constructed, that is one of the main things that we need to address with this, is the incorrect siting of the building. And as part of that incorrect siting, and as part of the further evaluation, there were further parking issues that were identified. So the intent of this is to bring the property into compliance and to clean this up and to get this building permit granted final occupancy.
Thank you for that clarification. Any further comments, Councillor?
No, I just know the property involved in it. It's what it was and what it is now are night and day. And incredible improvement in the neighborhood there. And I feel for the person who's gone through this year, 2 year, almost 3 year process to get a result. And it's a tough one. So anyway, it also, you mentioned there was an option to reduce.
We're not at that point yet.
Okay.
Item 3, so it's on item 1. So any further discussion on the motion on section number 1? Dealing with setbacks, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Item number 2. Someone want to put that on? Councilor Burchill.
The development variance permit DVP 2020-11 be approved at 1121 First Street West.
And that's dealing with driveway access both off of First Street West and Rail Street, so that they can get it. I lived in that neighborhood. I know how tight that alley is when it's open in the summer, and there is no snow plowing at this point in the winter. So I'm all for that. So any further discussion on this motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item number 3, we're dealing with the fees. Someone want to put that on the table, please? Councilor Burchill.
Maybe we should just discuss it before we actually put the motion on.
Okay. Why don't we put the motion on and then we can amend it if we need to? Or, Ms. Lowe, I'll ask for direction.
Your worship, putting the motion on the table allows you to discuss it.
Okay. Put the motion on the table?
Yes, the reduction of fees prescribed for in fees and charges by law number 2256 from $1,100 to $550 for DVP 2020-11 be authorized as fees have been previously collected with DVP 2017-14 and access issues were not addressed with that application.
Okay, second for the motion. Councilor Charlotte, discussion on the motion. Councilor Dunker.
Yeah, I would propose an amendment to the motion to reduce it to 100%.
To collect 100% or
No.
set to 0?
Reduction.
No,
Reduction
as
to-
the asterisk indicates, a reduction to 100%.
Okay.
It's $550 in the grand scheme of things. It's not a huge amount, and I think what they've been put through, no fault of their own, and issues with other things. I think it's a good gesture on behalf of the city.
Okay. Is that okay with the mover and the seconder?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I do it that way, or do I need to make a secondary motion? Okay. Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, staff did prepare a resolution to reflect the alternative option.
I just wasn't sure if we should amend it or just do the third one.
Okay, let's do the third one then.
Okay, so I'll withdraw that then.
Sure.
Okay. Sorry. I saw the third option, I wasn't sure.
So we're going to do this motion, if you would put that on. Councilor Brooksell?
The reduction of fees prescribed for fees in charge of bylaw number 2256 from $1,100 to zero for DBP 2020-11 be authorized as fees had been previously collected with DBP 2017-14, and access issues were not addressed with that application.
Okay, so was Councilor Charlotte, did you second that originally? Are you okay with that? Okay. Any further discussion on fees? So we're reducing it down to zero. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you, Mr. Simon. Thank you, Council. Moving on to items 5B, Development Services. You have another presentation. Mr. Simon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Another development variance permit application for council consideration. This is also in a residential area, and it is an application to vary the front yard setback requirements. So to give you some background, it's located at 101 Colbeck Road. This one is zoned single-family residential district, so the R1 zone. Falls within the multifamily development permit area. It's serviced by municipal water and sanitary, and it is surrounded by predominantly residential development with institutional lands and behind being the public golf course. So the development variance permit is to allow for the construction of an attached carport that will be connected to the existing dwelling. And to enable this, the following variances are required. A reduction, that is a typo on there, should be from the front yard setback from 6 meters to 2 meters. So as shown on the site plan that's in the council agenda package, the carport structure would be about 2.65 meters from the property line. The roof overhang itself would be 2.04 meters from the property line. So generally, staff are granting a variance to that roof overhang to ensure no ambiguity. And in this particular case, staff do recommend and have notified landowners of this addition to go to 2 meters. Just reduces any ambiguity at building permit stage should there be some very minor alterations as detailed design occurs. Staff don't feel that there's any technical or aesthetic impact as a result of this, but it does provide for that flexibility. So the proposal will allow for more covered parking on the lands in the winter months and will reduce the need for snow removal because it does increase the storage capacity on the carport structure itself. The carport will match the design of the deck on the dwelling, improving the overall aesthetics of the property. The owner is in the process of doing overall improvements to the property, and they are going to be looking at new siding as well as a new roof for the dwelling. And the carport structure itself will match the new improvements on the property. So again, because it's a development variance permit, this was sent to landowners within a 100-meter radius of the subject property. That was 24 different properties. No letters in support or opposition of the application were received. Staff are supportive of the variance to the front yard. It does allow for improved snow management on site, as previously stated, improves the aesthetics of the house, provides for an additional amenity, being covered parking. There's no anticipated operation and maintenance impacts to the city with respect to plowing in the right-of-way, and there's no immediate impacts that are envisioned for the surrounding properties. And then the recommendation in the proposed council resolution is on the board for council to consider. Thank you. This concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Council, will someone put the motion on the table? Councilor Yoder.
Yeah. Do you want me to read the entire thing?
Just the first part. Too.
That development variance permit DVP 2020-12 be approved as on the screen.
Great. Second for the motion, please. Councilor Charlotte. Any discussion on the motion? Well, this looks like a nice addition to this piece of property, and it's nice to see that they're going to take what's there now, and it's been there for a long time. It's a beautiful house, but they're going to improve it. So I'm supportive of this moving forward. Any other council members wish to comment? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you, Mr. Simon. Moving on to item 5C. Ms. Hartman, you have
Staff is presenting to council today an application for a temporary use permit, TUP 2020-01 and development permit number 2020-04 for applications to allow the use and the forming character of temporary workforce housing. Just before getting into the presentation, a bit of the overview that staff will be outlining today. I'll be going over the background, subject property, the proposal overview, background site photos that staff took, proposal details of the site and buildings, policy direction, consultation, and then including the staff recommendation. So a bit about the background of the subject property. The property is located at 1121 Johnson Way, approximately 12 hectares in size, and it's serviced by municipal water and sewer. It's located within the North Revelstoke neighborhood area, and it's also within the Johnson Heights District Study area. And as discussed in the staff report, the development of the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan is underway, and if this is adopted, all future development would be reviewed under this future plan, as well as temporary use permit reviews. The property is designated urban reserve in the official community plan bylaw, and it's also designated within the commercial industrial development permit area. The zoning bylaw designates the lot as rural residential 60 hectare district, which is RR60. So a bit about the background of the application. The applicant is working on behalf of Revelstoke Mountain Resort, RMR, and on behalf of the landowner of the private property. Revelstoke Mountain Resort is currently going through construction activities that they're proposing the realignment of Camosi Road to accommodate the golf course. They're proposing the Heli Resort and Conference Center, water reservoir, permanent staff housing on site, along with construction of parking lots and other development. This applicant has noted that this would be constructed over a 3-year period of time and that it has increased the need for workforce housing. So the temporary use permit in front of you today is to request to allow the use of temporary workforce housing to accommodate up to 60 construction workers. And this would be for these workers to build the infrastructure, permanent employee housing, and other resort developments. The applicant has also requested the commercial industrial development permit, which is for the forming character of the proposed accommodation structures, the parking, and the landscaping. The staff did a site visit on October 16th, 2020. A few of these photos just show the layout of the site. This photo is looking at the proposed temporary workforce housing site in proximity to Oak Drive and Johnson Way, and also the gravel road to the proposed driveway access, and this is looking south towards Johnson Way. The next photo here is looking towards Oak Drive up to Mount Becky Brewery and the Coast Hotel. Staff have taken this from the access road, which is the gravel road, to the proposed driveway access. And Johnson Way is just to the right there. This photo shows the proposed workforce housing site, the tree stand between the housing site and Johnson Way, and then the intersection of Oak Drive, Johnson Way, looking north with the KOA road to the campground at Montana Lane there. So for the proposed details of the site area would be around 1.2 acres, with the site perimeter being screened by a 6-foot chain link fence with privacy slats. The applicant has proposed gravel parking with 75 stalls for parking and for snow storage. This would also be screened by an additional chain link fence with privacy slats. You'll see where it's identified in the site plan to the right there. The applicant has proposed grass around the buildings and parking area, with shrubbery or small trees to be planted in and around the site. The existing tree stand is to remain, which will help screen the site from Johnson Way. And the applicant has proposed garbage and recycling at the north end of the lot in the form of lockable bear-proof bins. To the proposed buildings, the applicant is proposing 5 buildings approximately 300 square meters in size. These are in the form of axle skid or alpha fab skid mounted structures. The applicant has noted that they would be purchasing this by auction, and they have purchased one so far, which looks like the one in the top right-hand corner there with the cream color and red. The height is to be no more than 3 meters. An entrance with 1 to 2 steps with LED lighting at the front east face of the building to address dark sky policy, and the facilities would include cooking and common areas. So looking at policy direction for guiding review of this application, for the temporary use portion of the application, with the legislative review, Local Government Act does enable the city to pass a temporary use permit by resolution if the OCP enables a TUP to be permitted in a land designation of the OCP and outlines general conditions for the temporary use permit. So under the zoning bylaw, council may authorize a temporary use permit for up to 3 years, having regard for the following or any other criteria deemed reasonable, which may include the temporary use permit will operate at an intensity of use suitable to the surrounding area, the temporary use will be compatible with regard to use design and operation with other surrounding land uses, the temporary use will operate on a temporary basis only and include plans or a letter of undertaking to terminate that use prior to the expiry of the permit. And the financial security would be held by the city to ensure that the temporary use is removed and the site is appropriately restored after that or before that 3-year expiry. And the council may deem any other conditions appropriate onto that temporary use permit. With policy direction under the official community plan, the land is designated urban reserve, and the purpose of the urban reserve designation is to hold land for future development. So this would be prior to any permanent development being considered for the lands, and the objective of the OCP is to have a comprehensive plan or neighborhood plan be approved by council. So this is being underway currently through the Johnson Heights Neighborhood Plan. This has not yet been adopted, and the temporary use permit is looking at the current policy within the bylaws. So the North Revelstoke Johnson Heights District Study Area, some of the applicable policies pulled from these areas to consider are improving the traffic access to Highway 1 by either modifying or combining the access points and exploring safer alternative transportation routes into the city. This is being evaluated with a consultant on behalf of the city with the Johnson Heights Neighborhood Plan. And another item is implement barrier design and management that reduces human-wildlife conflicts. So this is also being looked at by the applicant with lockable bear-proof bins on site, and the property would be screened in by fences. So that was with the temporary use permit. For the development permit area, looking at form and character under the commercial industrial development permit area. So the form and character of the proposed use is temporary projects an industrial residential image in a rural residential, commercial, and tourist accommodation area. The surrounding uses of the site are greater than 100 meters from the subject site, and the proposed temporary development is not anticipated to have a visual impact from direct private lands. The exterior lighting for the accommodation structures and parking must be in accordance with the dark skies policy. For landscaping around the buildings and outside the parking areas, this will be grassed, and as discussed with the site plan, there'll be small shrubbery and trees around the site, and they will also be screened by the tree stand along Johnson Way. For parking, up to 75 gravel parking stalls have been proposed. This is over the requirement that the applicant needs to provide. However, they have provided 75 for snow storage as well. And garbage and recycling, as discussed, to be in the form of lockable bear-proof bins for resident use only. So with policy direction under the zoning bylaw, the property is zoned RR60, and the purpose includes accommodation of forestry, mining, transportation, recreation and water uses and activities, among other uses that are proposed under the purpose of the zone. The RR60 zone does outright permit the principal use of dormitory units and construction camps in connection with specifically upgrading new construction of utilities, transportation, and communication works. So the proposed workforce housing includes construction works intended for upgrading these utilities, transportation, and communication works. However, it does extend further to include on-mountain development. As such, a temporary use permit is required to cover the scope of all development activities, and the proposed temporary development does comply with all other aspects of the zoning bylaw. So when looking at that definition, if the workforce housing was specifically for communication, transportation, utility works, it would be outright permitted on the property temporarily. So staff would need to have some sort of development agreement restricting the time frame of that development. So for example, the Ministry of Transportation, BC Hydro, Railway proposed workforce housing on the site, it would be permitted and it would need to go through a development permit application for form and character. It's just a bit of a difference with the two proposals. So with public consultation, the local government must give notice to owners and tenants within 100 meters of the subject property and publish a notice in the newspaper no more than 14 and no less than 3 days prior to council consideration. So notices were sent to 31 property owners within 100-meter radius of the subject lands. And so this is 100-meter radius around the 12-hectare property, not around the specific site. So written submissions have been received. Staff have received 54 submissions, and they have been attached to the council report for your review and consideration. So part of the public consultation process, the staff did start to receive public submissions and questions and comments, and so staff did produce an FAQ on the city website answering some of these public comments and questions. And the following list summarizes the majority of the public submissions received and the main concerns, which are impact to the Johnson Heights property values, extra traffic and impact to the intersection at Oak Drive and the Trans-Canada Highway, COVID-19 precautions and concerns, considerations of the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan, survey to the residents and for future development, questions about the current zoning of the property, time frame of the TUP extending past 3 years, why the proposed workforce housing is not located on RMR lands, and visual impacts to tourists and residents of Johnson Heights, which staff have outlined in the FAQs and within the staff report to council. So staff did refer the application out to the Advisory Planning Commission to give a presentation at October 16th, 2020. And the council passed the following resolution that the Advisory Planning Commission is supportive of the temporary workforce housing, but has concerns that the need for temporary use will extend beyond the term of 3 years. The Commission wants to emphasize the importance of long-term employee housing to support the RMR development and operation. Their second resolution that was passed was that the Advisory Planning Commission accepts the form and character of the workforce housing. The Commission recommends the site being screened as much as possible from Oak Drive and Johnson Way, and the use of dark sky lighting designed to mitigate light pollution. Staff would refer the application out to other referral internal and external agencies, including Development Services, Engineering, Public Works, Fire and Rescue Services, Parks and Recreation, Culture, Interior Health, BC Hydro, Forest BC, TALUS, Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, and the RCMP. And those comments have been summarized in the staff report. The comments that staff received about the transportation impacts. Staff are working on the terms of reference for the traffic impact assessment of the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan currently with the Ministry of Transportation and the consultant. When staff referred that temporary use permit application to Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, their comments stated that the development did not trigger the review in accordance with the LGA and Transportation Act, as proposed development is under 4,500 square meters. Staff also referred out the application for review to the transportation consultant working on the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan, as they have already formulated background information gathered for this plan, which they have indicated that over the past 10 years, there have been statistics for 11 crashes, no fatalities have been reported at this intersection. The majority that they attributed to a single vehicle, wildlife-related or weather-related, and not directly attributed to the intersection safety. The consultant noted that the current peak trip time for this area is around noon, and the construction works would generate trips in the morning and evening. And recommendations from the consultant are completed a traffic study for the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan. Noted that workforce housing proposal may want to include providing a shuttle service to the lands and consideration of split shifts for the construction employees to reduce the impact at the intersection from the Oak Drive to Transport Canada Highway. And the applicant will be providing shuttle services. They have confirmed that, and that they noted that the shift times will be variable. So staff are recommending that council consider the temporary use permit and approve it for a 3-year period, subject to the following preconditions to issuance being met: that the owner provide a letter of undertaking signed by the subject property owners, undertaking to remove the accommodation and parking structures and restore the subject area of the property to the original state no later than the expiry of the temporary use permit, and that the owner provide a letter of security to the city, and this would cover the cost to remove the accommodation and parking structures and restore the subject property to its original state. And that for the development permit, staff recommend approval for the form and character to construct workforce housing consisting of the 5 prefabricated or modular accommodation structures with parking and landscaping, and that the following precondition of issuance being met would be that the owner is to provide a security for the due and proper completion of landscaping based on a cost estimate, and this would be provided and received at building permit issuance. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Ms. Hartling. So, councillors, can we get the motion on the table and we can discuss this, please? You want to make that motion, Councillor Sherwood?
Temporary use permit TUP 2020-01 be approved for a 3-year period for the use of workforce housing at 1121 Johnson Way, Lot 1, Section 25 and 26, Township 23, Range 2, west of the 6th Meridian, Goodman District Plan EPP 812, subject to the following preconditions to issuance being met as on the screen.
Second for the motion, please. Councillor Elliott, thank you. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Yockery, you want to start it off?
Yeah, Your Worship, I've got lots of questions and comments and questions. But my first question I'm going to ask is, on October 8th, 2019, when temporary use permits were approved in a vote at City Council, the minutes that were approved at the following meeting, I'll quote, the big question was about public hearings and public consultation. And in the minutes, it's quoted as saying, Mary Ann Wade, Director of Development Services, explained that the purpose for the bylaw amendments was to allow for temporary use permits across the city. She also explained that applications for temporary use permits would still require public hearings prior to council approval. Those are the adopted and accepted minutes.
Okay.
But there's no public hearing being required here.
Okay, so Ms. Hartling, do you want to weigh in, or Mr. Simon on that?
Weigh in on the temporary use permit requirements outlined in the Local Government Act. I do not have knowledge of that resolution, but the temporary use permit under the Local Government Act has 2 options that council can take with passing a temporary use permit for the review option. So one's by bylaw and one's by a resolution. So it would be by bylaw if there wasn't actually a designated area under an official community plan bylaw saying that temporary use permits can be reviewed. Typically, regional districts would have areas without OCP designations. These would not be able to be reviewed under a resolution. It would have to be by bylaw. That's because they're not designated for that use. So the bylaw that was adopted through in 2019 did designate areas that could be applied for under temporary use permits, and it designated all areas.
Right.
So,
and I do recall that that we had approved them for the whole city.
And so we're going to get back to the public hearing portion. That's what you're asking about, correct?
Well, my question is that, yeah, this doesn't list at all a public hearing being asked for.
Okay.
This is giving approval, and the minutes from the director stated in October 2019 that we accepted says all of them will require a public hearing.
Ms. Hartling, do you want to carry on?
So do you want me to comment on the past?
I know you weren't here. I'm just looking for clarity.
Maybe Mr. Simon has more insight?
Mr. Simon.
Through your worship, essentially what we have before council today is a temporary use permit that staff have followed the legislative requirements in this particular circumstance. Because the subject property does hold an official community plan land use designation, as Ms. Hartling had indicated, council resolution for adoption of the temporary use permit is the proper legislative process to follow. Staff have followed the legislative proceedings. That does include an advertisement in the newspaper between 3 and 14 days before the hearing, and it does include a landowner notification letter. The letters have been provided for council to review, and this application does not require a public hearing under the legislation because it has that OCP land use. If it didn't have the OCP land use, then the process would be that a public hearing would be required because it would be required to be adopted via bylaw.
And I appreciate that explanation, completely understand. Went back, watched the video. That explanation was not given, and we were specifically told public hearing at all.
Okay.
So that's just a concern, just want that noted. But I appreciate and I understand, I'm not insinuating at all that it's not being done properly. I know you guys are following it absolutely 100%. It just should be noted that that's what we were informed and accepted minutes.
Okay. Mr. Simon.
Through your worship, just something that I think is very important for council and members of the community to understand, which Ms. Hartling had already touched upon. The fact that this zone does contain a use that is reflective of workforce housing for utility projects. Staff did take the approach that a temporary use permit would be required, in part because it does allow further notification, advertising requirements so that property owners are made aware of it. Now there is more opportunity for the community to provide input to council, and that there is more control for council to regulate this through a temporary use permit. As Ms. Hartling had indicated, if it was just a utility works construction project and they wanted to do a construction camp, that use is already permitted and there would be no public process to be followed here. So just want to make that known for council as well as for the community.
Great. Mr. Simon, as we know, the Johnson Heights project that's up there now was originally put up by BC Hydro during the Dan days, and that was their project, and then they gave it over to the city. So,
Oh yeah, no, that's totally fair. I understand those comments. Just want to,
make that statement.
well, yeah, from the previous meeting, it was not explained properly.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for that. Any other comments on this motion? Councilor Bruce.
I have a couple of questions. From a utility perspective or cost perspective, like if someone was going to build a hotel that was going to house 60 people, they would pay a commensurate amount of taxes based on the property value. So how does the city get value from this temporary use?
So through your worship, they would require a building permit and a works and services agreement to pay for all of the utility connections. Through taxation purposes, it would be the property owner and the applicant making they have a lease agreement with, if there is an increase in taxes, we would be paying for that. But through the city's costs, it would be through works and services.
Okay. So further to that question, if I may, Councilor Brooks Hill. So we have our Director of Finance here. So if this were to go forward, Ms. McCabe, there would be some tax implications for the property owner because there's now buildings on it. Is that correct? How does that work?
Through your worship, that's correct. BC assessment determines the class of a property based on its use as of a specific date according to the legislation. And so this would be, currently the property is classed residential. And so because it's being used to house workers, it would probably continue to be classed residential. But there would be value added because right now it's just land and there will be improvements. And BC assessment would assess the value of that.
Great.
And then it would be taxed on it.
Good. Thank you for answering that question. You had another question, Councilor Brooks Hill?
So somewhere in there it says that council can provide other conditions to the temporary use.
Through your worship, for example, with form and care them. It's up to council's discretion if they were to add additional conditions to having that development on the site. Look at landscaping, different conditions like form and character, the look, or the location of the proposed use on the subject site. Because we're looking at the subject plan.
That answer your question, or is it confusing?
Sorry, what do you mean?
No.
It does partially, but in terms of other conditions, so that other conditions is in relation to the development permit and not in relation to the temporary use permit?
Through your worship, you can put conditions on a development permit and a temporary use permit. That section of the presentation was specifically looking at how a temporary use permit is reviewed. But with the development permit and a temporary use permit, both the permits that have been presented to you in draft format have conditions within them that the applicant must meet in order to have issuance of that permit.
Further question?
Mr. Simon has his hand up.
Okay.
I'll wait to see what he has to say.
And then I'm just going to make a statement too on what I've already asked, but go ahead.
Through your worship, just to add on to that, I think it would be helpful for staff to understand what conditions council would be contemplating, and then we can provide direction as to what the appropriate avenue is, because with respect to the development permit, we have to be very cognizant that conditions can only be applied as they relate to the development permit area guidelines that are adopted in the official community plan. If there are conditions that council deems appropriate to apply to the temporary use permit, then that would be applied differently under the legislation compared to the development permit. So for staff to understand what direction council will be going, then we can direct you to the appropriate avenue of where to put those conditions.
Well, essentially what I was thinking was attaching a condition that RMR would have to undertake a secondary access point to Johnson Heights.
Through your worship, so one thing that Ms. Hartman touched upon that staff have been working on is the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan. Overall network analysis to determine infrastructure upgrades that are required, specifically road upgrades, to enable a comprehensive development form out there is a complex undertaking. Financing of those improvements is a complex undertaking to ensure we get it right and that we have appropriate arrangements in place, and that developers, as they come through, are paying their fair share. Something that's very important for council to consider as part of this application is that this is a temporary use permit that is looking at a maximum of the next 3 years, whereas the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan is envisioning permanent development over the course of the next 20, 30, 40 years, where those long-term infrastructure upgrades need to be improved. I'm not a transportation engineer, but planners do work quite closely with them. And when we're determining when a second access is needed, it's based on thresholds. So once development reaches a certain threshold, and we have a certain number of trips that are triggering an intersection to fail, and a secondary access is needed, that would be embedded through policy in the neighborhood plan. So I just want to be very aware, I want council to be very aware of that distinction of those long-range infrastructure planning objects that we got to embed through OCP policy and what we have before you today with the temporary use permit. But I will say the access constraints in Johnson Heights is obviously a big consideration as part of the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan that staff are actively working on as we speak.
So just before Councilor Juncker weighs in, I just want to kind of make what I have seen with the letters that have come in from property owners. So there's 3 issues that seem to be paramount here. So aesthetics, property value, and traffic. And I think all are kind of dealt with in the report, but I'd ask staff to find out if there was another way that we could, rather than ATCO white or red or whatever it is, that we actually have those buildings painted in an earth tone so that they blend into the neighborhood. They have the fencing going up around it, and some landscaping, that sort of thing. A little concerned, I'm not sure what it means by negating property value of those who already live up there. I don't understand that concern, because this is a temporary thing that's going on, and it's not seen from the residents who already live in that Johnson Heights neighborhood, other than on their in and out. And traffic, I think that's been dealt with the the proponent suggesting that they will actually have buses to transport their workers to and from work. Is that not correct, Mr. Simon? Ms. Hartley?
Through your worship is the Everything Shuttle, the Revelstoke Shuttle, that would be adding stops up to Johnson Heights neighborhood. So it would service the residents up there and it would have a stop at the site.
Okay, so it's not a defined RMR paying for the shuttle to get these workers to and from work. Is that correct? It's a stop. So Ms. Bryan, you're going to weigh in.
Just regarding the shuttle services, that's currently in negotiation with RMR and the city and working together with Engineering Public Works. As you recall, we had allocated a certain amount of funding to RMI funding to covering the shuttle services for this year and next. And we're looking out with the council and RMR and other partners right now to see what portion is going to be attributed to RMR for the staff shuttle and what is going to be covered by RMI for visitors and residents to get to the hill.
Okay, thank you for that input. So Councillor Juncker, then Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. A couple things I just want to clarify. Mr. Simon had said for 3 years, but this actually can be for 3 years, plus they can then reapply for another 3 years as the legislature.
They can apply to council of the day.
Maximum of 6. A couple questions, and I see Mr. Black's not here today, but I had an engineering question because when our previous engineer was here and we had talked about neighborhood plans when we were starting to get going, one of the topics that we had discussed at a previous council meeting in my notes was about the future of Johnson Heights. And one of the big concerns there, and it's actually in our capital spending under the water utilities and sewer, is that the infrastructure up there is extremely old, and the lift station, I had written down, but the lift station and pump stations down there are both calling for basically immediate replacement, extreme costs. And I remember the conversation at that meeting, when we were talking at the budget meetings, was that basically development couldn't be further done up there until we had dealt with that sewer, the pump station at least, and maybe not the whole station, but the pumps needed to be changed, and there's costs there, and which is why they actually got moved up on the capital projects.
Mr. Simon's going to weigh in because he's kind of...
Through your worship, so just a couple of things there. So before going on to the utilities question, with respect to the length of the temporary use permit, I want to clarify for council and for members of the public that staff have been working with Revelstoke Mountain Resort. The intent is for this to last 3 years. At the end of the 3 years, we are anticipating having a Johnson Heights neighborhood plan adopted into the OCP, which would provide a different policy framework for staff to evaluate any renewal application against. The expectation is for a staff housing development proposal to be coming in to initially be breaking ground in spring 2021, and that by the end of this temporary use permit, any workers that are still required for the construction activities would actually be housed in permanent staff housing owned at RMR property. So I just wanted to provide the level of detail for council so that they're aware of the conversations that staff have been having with the resort. And then with respect to the utility infrastructure out there, upon application of a building permit for the subject property, we're talking about 5 modular units here, about 300 square meters apiece. The level of servicing that's going to be required for that would be determined at building permit stage through civil site servicing drawings, as Ms. Hartling had indicated, through a works and services agreement as well. So staff would be determining any upgrades that are required. I believe that the findings of the previous reports that are indicating servicing options, we're looking at a more cohesive, comprehensive development proposal for all of Johnson Heights to identify the necessary infrastructure upgrades that would be required to enable that full build-out. I'm not a civil engineer, but if the services that are required to enable this development at building permit stage are determined to require an upgrade of the lift station, that would be quite extensive servicing that would be needed for this minor development. So I believe those are comprehensive master planning scenarios as opposed to planning on an individual site-specific basis.
Yeah, thanks. Well, just to respond to that, yeah, no, that's great. I just was looking at my notes from the conversations and the capital projects, and they got moved up. And I think that's a fair comment from Mr. Simon to make, the discussions with RMR about their intentions. I'm hesitant to believe intentions for many reasons of past history, as well as COVID. We don't know where that's going to go. That can collapse companies, businesses, whatnot. So again, I think it is important. It's 3 years, and then they could reapply. So that I just want to clarify on the lift station, so thank you for the answer. Can I ask another question? Sure. One of my other concerns was about the shuttle. Really concerned about that. That was redone, as Ms. Braun explained. So now a lot more RMI funding has now gone towards paying for that. And the RA is going to be paying more so for the marketing side kind of thing. I struggle hearing that the resort's plan to get their workers, to the resort is going to be by putting them on a resort municipality initiative funded bus meant for getting our skiers and people to the resort. So I'm glad to hear that Ms. Braun saying there's talks now of the funding, but I'm hesitant again to approve anything until we see that funding. When that bus is paid for through tax dollars, right? That's not what I see the use as being for.
Okay. All right, thank you for that comment. Ms. Braun, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. The ski shuttle service has traditionally been split, the cost of it has been split 3 ways, with RMR paying a third and RAW paying a third, and the city paying a third, and using RMI funds for their third. So the purchase of the bus and maintenance of the bus, yes, it's a city-owned vehicle, but the cost to operate it and maintain it are shared equally with the partners. And the intention of the original program, I understand, was to keep cars off the road and get workers to the hill and back from the hill. So it's always been a joint venture for both residents, visitors, and employees of the hill.
Councillor Shuttle, actually, Councillor Elliott had his hand up. Can I go to you for and then Councillor Shuttle?
Sure. Well, you're related probably to that transportation.
Yeah, just kind of building on.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So I appreciate hearing that the shuttle is going to be available to the residents as well as the staffers. I think that's a very functional use of the service. My concern is it going to run year round? Because it's the summer highway traffic that is the challenge, and the shuttle service typically runs only in the winter season. So I just want to make sure that we're talking about something that's going to be applicable year-round, because I think that's where there's a huge opportunity to make access to Johnson Heights a lot easier.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just clarify one thing, because I see Ms. Braun standing up. On the RA call a few weeks ago that I was part of, we had Mr. Oh my gosh, his name slipped my head, from Everything Revelstoke, talking about the new routes for the winter season. And one of the big changes that we're going to see, there's some of the starting earlier, the running later, as well as bringing in the Hillcrest as well, and the implications of that, which is exciting. So are the residents going to be expected to walk from Johnson Heights then all the way up to the Hillcrest? Because it specifically talks about, as well as residents, the RA call had mentioned about being at the, I'm just looking for clarification.
Okay, maybe Ms. Braun can answer that.
That's your worship. I just looked at the schedule that's being proposed. We're meeting actually with Scott Pass from Everything Revelstoke tomorrow, I believe, and kind of finalizing some of the details. He's already been in discussions with Steve Black about what that shuttle service is going to look like and how it's being tweaked to service both Johnson Heights residents and Hillcrest Hotel theaters, as well as, for instance, adding the Nordic Center to the plan scope.
Yeah, that was the other one that was added.
So
it was going to one stop at the Hillcrest.
I don't know if that, I can't.
Unless they've changed it in the last 3 weeks.
That may well have happened. In fact, the question I just sent myself by email to Steve was to find out if this discussion this evening is going to impact how we're setting up the shuttle service. But certainly anything related to staffing is the responsibility of RMR to pay for. And in the summer, RMR does maintain another vehicle that they contract with Everything Revelstoke to get staff around. So there are other options that can be dealt with directly between Everything Revelstoke and RMR.
So they're committing to a shuttle then, year round?
Mr. Simon, I'll let you weigh in.
Through your worship, every indication that staff have received is that this would be intended to provide a shuttle service for as long as the construction workers are required out in Johnson Heights. And the whole intent is to minimize impact on that existing intersection at Oak Drive and Trans-Canada Highway. RMR is also committed to supporting split shifts and having variable hours. to further reduce the impact. And as Ms. Hartling had indicated, peak traffic on the worst days out there is usually around noon, and construction activities are generally going to not take place at noon. So there will be some variable shift hours that will be looking to further reduce that impact in every way possible.
Thank you. Councilors, any further comment? Councilor Murray?
How did the noon time get determined? Is that on the traffic study or something?
Through your worship, it's based on the background analysis that the consultant is working on the transportation impact assessment for Johnson Heights.
For the neighborhood plan?
Yes.
Right, okay. Yeah, it just seems weird to me. I would think that morning and afternoons, as people are going to and from work, would be the busiest, but.
So the biggest issue for me is I'm trying to understand.
Just a second, Ms. Hartman, you had a comment?
Your worship, the peak times are also the highway traffic passing through Revelstoke, so the highest time of traffic going through is noon, or how much traffic is on the highway.
That makes sense.
Okay, Mr. O'Leary.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand why at Johnson Heights, up in that part of town, as opposed to the resort. And I think that's the biggest confusing part for most of the community, is why they're as opposed to close to the resort. And it hasn't been really expressed in the presentation, so I'm just trying to, maybe a bit more clarity would help.
Ms. Hartman, Mr. Simon, do you want to weigh in on the reasons behind the choice here?
Yeah, through your worship, can't speak on behalf of the applicant, but the applicant has indicated why they've chosen this property. The first application that they submitted to staff, which are under the development permit 2020-04 and TUP 2020-01. The original application was in the spring for a West Side Road property, and we sent it out for referrals, and a lot of comments that came back from Interior Health about servicing issues. So they deemed that property not feasible for the 3-year period for their temporary use housing because of the servicing that would have to be put onto that site. They've also noted that their existing lands, some of them are being ready for development, and some have geotechnical constraints, environmental constraints. Some of the property was within more eyesight of neighboring developments, so people would be seeing the workforce housing camps. But what staff are looking at is the actual property that they've chosen. They've chosen this because it's a flat property, servicing's right there, there's no view site of the temporary workforce housing, and they chose this property based on that construction camps are permitted in the zoning bylaw.
Yeah, and the property owner, what role is he in this?
So Armour does have a lease agreement with the property owner. They do want this on their property. So it is a private property that has given agent authorization to the agent of Revelstoke Mountain Resort to apply on their behalf. So the property owner is looking at doing future development. They do have a rezoning and OCP amendment application with the city. This has been with the city since 2018, and this was really part of instigating the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan for a more comprehensive development plan for larger scale developments. So this landowner is waiting for the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan to guide their development with their application, and this is a revenue stream for them to have some of the property in the meantime. It won't impact their proposed development.
Right. Okay. Can I carry on? Just so the plan indications from what this property owner has in mind included a bunch of travel, trailer, campground components. He had tourist homes. He had several things lined up for that property. Is that correct?
Through your worship, the plans have been updated. They've been working with staff, and staff are reviewing the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan in consultation with stakeholders. So that plan, once it's adopted, will guide that landowner's development. So they may need to do some updates so that they're in line with the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan and what's proposed for their site under the plan. So what you saw before under RVs is not the proposal anymore.
Mr. Simon.
Just to add on to that, as staff have been working through the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan, a comprehensive residential development, as was previously presented at the committee of the whole meeting, is what is envisioned for that area. So staff are working on refining the concept, refining the policy framework, at which point the development concept for the subject lands that are before you today can start the comprehensive planning process of conforming to that plan.
we carry one more?
Yeah, one more.
I know we've done a Johnson Height neighborhood plan. It's been initiated. That's been gone through, and it was quite. The way it was handled was very good. I mean, we identified what was important, what was valuable up there, and they created some sort of visionscape for the future, and then they got some guiding principles to move by. But my problem with the whole thing is that's done. That's now dictating our OCP and where we're going to go. But that same process hasn't happened for our city. You know, to me, our development on the fringe of our town doesn't seem to fit. If it does, you know, would you want development that far from downtown? I mean, there are extra costs. You mentioned infrastructure needs, roads, a new roadway to access the site. Those are major expenditures. And we are led, basically it's the tail wagging the dog at this point. They're a neighborhood on the fringe, and they're dictating our future. Currently, it's zoned temporary. It could accommodate residential or work camps and that sort of, it's in the zoning. But that's meant to be for the fringe. That was our history there. It was originally put up as a work camp or temporary housing for the dam workers. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm just, it's a very awkward, there's a lot of issues in play here, but I think it really deserves some attention.
Mr. Simon wants to weigh in, and Councilor Young.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to make sure that we're still dealing with the matter at hand today. The discussion of servicing infrastructure requirements and land use concept for the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan area is a separate conversation from what we have before you today, which is a temporary use permit for the construction camp. Staff can provide an analysis, as we did previously, about how those two processes can run in parallel and how we're controlling this through the provisions of the temporary use permit to ensure it does not impact the future viability of that plan. But I just want to make sure when we're talking comprehensive transportation planning, comprehensive servicing, that is more related to the high-level neighborhood plan as opposed to the temporary use permit that's before you today.
I think what's come down from the people, the residents in the area, is that they're upset that they've just gone through a neighborhood plan and now we're allowing this temporary use, which seems contrary to.
Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, you are correct. Staff have been going through a comprehensive engagement process to develop a vision of what Johnson Heights will be over the next 20, 30, 40 years, and that's where we really need to delineate these two items. We are dealing with a temporary use permit that will be for a maximum of 3 years. And from a professional planning perspective, in my view, the fact that we have this process rolling for the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan gives an additional level of surety to the community as well as to council that at the end of this 3-year period, should this TUP be adopted, we would have new plan, new policies in place that any renewal of this temporary use permit would be evaluated against. And if that new plan and those policies state that comprehensive residential development is what's envisioned for the area, then staff at the time might not see any renewal application potentially being supported.
Thank you. Councilor Young?
Thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, just kind of further to Councillor Elliott's and what Mr. Simon had said, I think the big thing, you indicated the concerns, but I think we've got to go back to staff made the decision to do Johnson Heights neighborhood plan first. They had kind of just said, not this staff, but this is kind of what they did. And they did, and of course we support them. They know, you know, that one needed to be done, this neighborhood plan. Here we are today. It's taken a lot of time, but it's the first one and needed to take time. It's cost tens and tens of thousands of dollars of consultant fees, and all tax dollars. And then you come forward to October 7th, when staff had their meeting with the neighborhood, and I agree, I think it's been a terrific process. The public up there have told me they thought our staff have done a tremendous job through this. And then it goes to the APC and they're not even told. They weren't even told. They weren't even advised at this meeting that, by the way, this has been on the go on the side. So I think the problem there is that it erodes trust in City Hall. You know, when they're not advised, which is indicated in a lot of the emails. So we have this neighborhood, and Mr. Simon had mentioned by the end of the 3 years, but what I gathered at the committee of the whole meeting when we discussed this is that this is kind of getting towards the wrapping up. Like there's the majority of the work here has been accomplished, and it's like within the next,
For the neighborhood plan.
for that neighborhood plan,
Yeah.
not for the entire thing, because the entire OCP, Ms. Wade had said that the vision with the neighborhood plans, when Councillor Ryan had asked, was before our term was done.
Yeah.
And that this neighborhood plan would be wrapping up pretty shortly.
Right.
So it's rightfully concerning to me that this temporary use permit is kind of coming in right before we're about to wrap up this plan, whereas if it came in after this plan, as Mr. Simon has said, things might be quite different. So I just think we should need to consider the residents' like. It's a tough one, but the residents' voices need to be heard, I think. I don't think everybody gets to have a veto just because they don't want something in their backyard, but I think they have the right to be concerned that this doesn't, yes, while it's temporary, whether that's 3 years or 6 years, it doesn't align really with what we've been working on for a while now with the neighborhood plan.
Okay. Mr. Simon, any comment?
Through your worship, thank you. So with this and with respect to the end of the 3-year term and where we would be at in terms of the progression with development in the Johnson Heights area, we would hope to have some development proposals that have come in and that are underway. So at the end of the 3-year term, it could be a very different development context than what we're seeing today. And I will note that the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan is still going through a community review process, and it still will need to come before council, and that when an application is submitted for staff to review, we are reviewing it against current policy, and that is reflected in what you see in staff's recommendation today.
Can I just clarify one thing, Your Worship? Ms. Hartling, you had said 2018 the development had been with staff since 2018. Were you talking about the development proposed by the owner of the lands or this TUP?
No, through your worship, the owner of the
Not this one,
lands
yeah.
for 1121 Johnson Way submitted OCP and rezoning application and committee of the whole, and there's other applications submitted on other lands, directed staff to hold off on those applications to do a more comprehensive review of the...
Just wanted to make sure I understood correctly. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, I had a tough time with this only because, as Councillor Yonker was mentioning, we've received a lot of negative feedback from people that live in the area who are against this proposal. And I think it's important to listen to those residents and to make sure they feel that we are listening to them. And some of the concerns about why this development isn't put on RMR don't seem that strong to me, like why the proponent isn't choosing to put it on their property. I'm sure that they've looked into that, but when I see, this is a humongous property, they have all kinds of different land, and if you think about the money that they're going to spend to develop and build out their plan, like a golf course and whatever, another hotel, that's like just millions of dollars. So the amount that it's going to cost to grade a lot for however small their proposed construction work camp is going to be, or maybe they have to service it, that's really a drop in the bucket in the grand scheme of things. So to me, it sounds a lot more like they're concerned about those eyesight concerns that Ms. Hartling was mentioning, and I think that's not very fair to the residents who are now saying, this is going to be an eyesore, we don't want it, and then we have you, Your Worship, saying, well, we can just paint them and make them look nice. Well, if that's easy and we can make them look a little bit nicer with some earth tones, then maybe RMR could do that on their own property and make it just a little bit less unsightly. So that would be my hope, is that they could find a spot and make it just not look as ugly, and that everybody would win. And I think too, there's other benefits of having it close to where they're going to be doing the construction. From an environmental perspective, you have now foot traffic to work versus actual traffic. Right. And you also, they're probably going to eat at the Rockford and the tavern and all that stuff. So I feel like it's probably in their best interest. But I just don't understand why it's not going to be on their land. It just seems like the reasons provided in the report aren't substantiated.
Okay, so Mr. Simon, please.
Just one of the items that I think is very important for council to be aware of, the current zoning of the lands does permit construction camps. So that was one of the main reasons why this site was chosen, because that is a use that is embedded in the zone. Regardless of what policy comes into place through the neighborhood plan, through the official community plan, this property is zoned for a construction camp. So as Ms. Hartling had indicated, if we did have a construction camp that was submitted, where it's only related to utility work. This would be a potential minor or major development permit application that would be coming before council, where we are quite limited in terms of our evaluation. So the development itself could very well be permitted if the use that the development is intending to serve, which would be off-site, would be only related to utility work. So something that's important for council to understand, as well as the public, in terms of why the site was chosen. Within the development pocket itself on the subject lands, there are no property owners, no developed property, rather, within 100 meters of the site. So it was chosen in part for that reason as well. We did speak with the resort about different development options on the subject lands that are owned by RMR, and there will be servicing constraints as well as constraints in terms of the impact to already developed properties. This site was determined to be quite a suitable option from an aesthetic perspective, impact on adjacent properties perspective, a servicing perspective, as well as a compatibility with respect to the existing uses that are permitted in that zone. So I just wanted to, if there is further explanation, again, as Ms. Hartling indicated, we're doing our best, given that applicants are unable to attend, to reflect conversations that we've had to try and give council accurate answers. But that is the rationale, just a bit.
Let's try and follow.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's great. You guys have lots of good information, and I believe that all the appropriate homework has been done, but just the wording, like servicing constraints, to me just means like money constraints. And I just don't feel that that's necessarily other residents' concerns, because, well, actually my other question is more important, is like, could RMR on their own land just put this on? Because their lands are all part of an NDA, right? So
Through your worship,
Yeah.
the question of whether or not a temporary use permit can be permitted within a comprehensive development zone is a bit of a bigger question from a planning perspective, from a legislative perspective, based on the policies we have in our OCP, and whether or not that would actually be permitted, or whether or not it would have to be done through a rezoning application. So staff would have to do a further analysis and potentially look at getting legal insight as to whether or not, based on the way our policies are crafted, a CD zone could actually accommodate a temporary use permit under the legislation.
that would have been useful information.
So I can check into it.
That's great to know now.
Okay.
Thanks.
Councilors, any other comments? Councilor Brooks-Hill, Councilor Charlotte, and then Councilor Guilford.
I won't be supporting this. Item 8C in our agenda is that the committee of the whole recommend to council that the Johnson Heights Neighborhood Communications Plan, including surveys, be supported. That's where at our last committee of the whole meeting, we saw the vision that the residents of Johnson Heights put forward. And it clearly does not encompass this. So I just feel if we support this, we'll be telling residents, don't bother participating in these surveys because we're not going to listen.
Councilor Charlotte.
I'm curious as to the timeline, the temporary use permit, would this be housing for this winter? Like this would get put in time for this winter?
Yes. And further question?
I'd comment then, because we're starting to get to this point where like, do we support this or not? And one of the things that I'm seeing right now, we are in a massive housing crunch.
Yeah.
There is some developments that are on the go that in a couple of years will be coming online. Like I've been walking by Columbia Gardens most days as we walk the dog, and watching that get finished, I'm just like, I just wish it could happen faster. I wish all of this could happen yesterday. And it is so frustrating that that is not possible. That yes, I'm so proud of this Johnson Heights neighborhood planning process. I think it's fantastic. I think there is value in residents participating and being heard. It's important to note that the zoning for this land already allows for that workforce housing. This is not a massive change. And yes, I can understand why it would be frustrating and intimidating and all of these reasons that have been brought forward. I really hope that shuttle service can be functional throughout the year, because that's my big concern is traffic next summer. Is that I get that the accident rate may not be that high, but it is still a terrifying intersection, regardless of whether somebody has died yet. That is something that needs to have some, I would love to see some wording around that. But as it stands with the supports and what I've heard so far, I will be supporting this. It's a hard decision. It sucks. I don't see a good side to this, but every time we approve a development permit, it's where's the staff housing? Here, finally, it is. Right? This is something that we desperately need, and I appreciate that it will be within that 3-year window. I hope that it does not come back for an extension, that the employee housing at the resort gets built and can be used, because it would not be as full during the summer months when construction was at its peak. So hopefully that will all go through, and I trust our staff to be able to keep this in line.
Councillor Yunker, then Councillor Ryan, then Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, and really good comments there, and I agree, understand the zoning, but again, I look at it and I go, well, yeah, the zoning says that, but we also have 8C that says we're doing surveys and neighborhood plans, which will ultimately determine what the zoning, what the community plan looks like and what they envision. And just a question further, because Councillor Shaw asked me a question. I was under the impression, again from Ms. Wade explanation, that, and Mr. Black, there was narrow times that they would do minor construction this fall because of, I think it was the owls, or there was a nesting season for the birds, and then work would resume in the spring on the golf course. And whatever else they're doing there at the hotel. So if these are being put in, are they going to house seasonal work employees, or are they going to sit there empty until, because it mentions like several times about construction employees.
Well, it's construction employees, so my understanding, Mr. Simon, you can correct me, is that they're going to carry on doing some construction up there. They got part of the foundation in for the Heli Hotel, and then they're going to put in a foundation for the employee housing, or somewhere along there that's going to coincide. How's that working?
Through Your Worship is correct. So there is construction works that are underway. The resort is working through their environmental approval process with respect to the golf course, and that will allow subsequent construction once they have been through that process to occur. And this will house construction employees, and it will also house permanent employees of RMR. You will not be seeing employees that are operating ski lifts that are seasonal. Typically, that would be residing in the staff accommodation. And the intent here is to house employees that are going to be working on the construction activities. There's the water reservoir project as well. That will be key. And that's one of the things, too, that council needs to be aware of, is that there are a lot of elements of these construction activities, because it is quite broad in terms of the scope, that do fit within the current use as permitted in the zoning, and that staff had made the decision to go through the TUP process to make sure that it captures 100% of the activities, not just 50 or 60 or 70% of them. So yes, it is for the construction employees, and staff have confirmed that with Revelstoke Mountain Resort.
So to clarify then, we were kind of, construction actually will be going all winter then, because before, and in the previous reports, it just had said the narrow time and then resuming in the spring.
So the narrow time, I believe, was doing some construction on the golf course where the birds were nesting. And so that part will be left. We can't do that. That's an environmental thing with the provincial government.
Yeah, well,
that's the construction that they can do will be on the resort site where they're already starting construction.
Possibly tree clearing, because you can't pour a concrete foundation when it's -20.
No.
So, okay, so something.
And so do they have part of the foundation for the Heli Hotel in already?
Through Your Worship, yes.
There's a little bit done over there, yeah.
And again, through Your Worship and for all council, just to reiterate, the next application that is anticipated to come forward, and staff are working with the resort on right now, is for the employee housing, and these construction workers who would be working on that employee housing, which is anticipated to be in the spring of 2021.
Great. All right, Councillor Lane, you had your hand up, and then Councillor Ryan.
To make this more palatable, would a 2-year temporary use be a possibility for us to recommend?
I'm not sure all the work's going to be done in 2 years.
Well, it doesn't matter. Hopefully by then, Columbia Garden and the Front Street, all these extra developments coming regarding affordable housing will be in place. Or some improvements will be made in that front as well.
So I guess my question to you, with all due respect, is do we house workforce housing in housing that's designed to be for permanent residents? That's kind of my concern. So if we give them the 3 years and they have that, and if within 3 years they're now able to transition their workforce housing to their own workforce, then it doesn't negate the housing that we need for the rest of the community. And so right now we have zero accommodation for the rest of the community, and as Councillor Charlotte has said, that getting these BC housing projects off the ground and getting them going, getting them open so they're actually livable, helps our community. And rather than fill them with workforce housing, we fill them with people who are here that want to live here permanently.
Well, I think we're going 3 and 3, and we can go 2 and 1 or 2 and 2. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's just we can renew it after 2. But the pressure is to get it done or get something done, and it's not long term. I mean, there's a revolt going on in Johnson Heights about temporary ATCO trailers in our neighborhood, and I'm saying, okay, let's not.
I think to be fair,
entrench it
those
for 3
emails
years.
weren't from there too. And just to clarify, a good portion of those emails aren't just from there.
Yeah, okay. But I just think.
Thank you. So in this, I agree with you. I'd be interested in seeing if it's possible to shorten this up, because that it incentivizes RMR to expedite their building of the employee housing, and then in theory they could use that employee housing for construction workers if they want to continue to build whatever else they want to build. And I think it shows residents that we're committed to holding them to some kind of accountability when it comes to this kind of stuff. Like, they said that they're going to create this housing, and they should do that. But I don't think we should necessarily allow for a longer term temporary use permit. I don't think we should allow it to be extended, because I think that just pushes off the time that they will then be able to build the much needed employee housing. So
with the temporary use permit is set up to go for 3 years, is that correct? Mr. Simon, Ms. Hartling, that's, so if I were to go in and I want a temporary use permit to put in whatever, you're going to say, okay, a temporary use permit is a 3-year maximum permit or a 3-year permit regardless. Is that correct? Can you just guide me on
Your
that?
Worship, no, you can be max 3 years.
Okay.
So you can be 1, 2, 3 years, no more than 3.
Okay, so before us is a resolution to give them 3 years. What is the likelihood of them getting it done in less than 3 years and moving on?
Through your worship, again, for us, based on our conversations that we've had with the applicant, 3 years would be the maximum amount of time. Staff would have reservations about approving a TUP for less than 3 years, because we want to make sure that we are setting the expectations, should this permit be approved, at what the expectations are from council and from the community. If we grant a period of less than 3 years, then we could potentially be looking at a renewal application that may have to come before council for consideration. The preference of staff would be to deal with this all in one go, rather than subjecting this to subsequent renewal applications that need to be considered.
Great, thank you. Ms. Ryan.
So when I had been listening to everybody's comments, I totally agree with Councillor Brooks Hill in that, for me, this is a matter of principle in that it signals to residents that their OCP consultation and these neighborhood plans is like not important. Why would you even bother showing up? So I was really against this application because of that and how it aligns with what we're trying to accomplish in these neighborhood plans, or how it poorly aligns with that. But now that I know that we can reduce the temporary use permit years, I'm more inclined to support it if we did a 2-year with a 1-year renewal, in the sense that, and after 2 years, like, we don't guarantee that it will be renewed after 2 years, so they have some urgency in creating this app accommodation. And I totally agree with Councillor Charlotte that the housing constraints are a huge piece of why I would be possibly supporting this this motion, because it will be devastating to have more people in the limited capacity we have right now.
Okay. Before we go on, Councillor Juncker, I'm going to ask Ms. Hartman to go back a couple screens on the thing. Back to the image of the proponent's project. Right here. So when I look at Johnson Way here, Oak Drive here, how are they accessing that? They're going in through here and then out, correct?
Yes, correct, Your Worship.
Okay, so it's a minimal access here. Around the perimeter here, there's trees in this area, is that correct?
There's the tree stand on Johnson Way, right there.
Okay, so basically this is across the road from the project. Is this the only tree along here, or is there several other further down?
There's trees stand all the way to Oak Drive, and then south of the property, there's trees along Johnson Way as well.
So pretty much, if I'm remembering correct, my time driving up into Johnson Way, that's pretty much treed. So other than, pardon me, on the Johnson Heights, other than that little gravel driveway that goes in there, pretty much you're not going to see that, the project itself, unless you're along Oak Drive or over by the brewery, and then you're going to see the fence with the slats, and is that correct?
That's correct, and then small trees and shrubbery along the perimeter of the site.
Okay, and so my thoughts were I'm supportive of this in a 3-year term being temporary, and here's why. As we talked about housing in the community and putting pressure on housing. So if we've got workforce housing for these people, if they've got a shuttle going up, and if we do some aesthetic changes where we actually paint these things, or they paint them before they arrive in earth tones, and they put a fence around it that have the privacy slats, and then maintain it. So those privacy slats, as they break down, are replaced, and it looks well. And then after the 3-year period, it's all cleaned up and it goes back. So what I hear from the property owners up there, their biggest concern was, first of all, we don't want an eyesore. Secondly, we're concerned about traffic at Oak Drive in the Trans-Canada Highway. That's been an issue that I've been dealing with the MO2I and the Eastern Access for years because of the work that I do. There has never been anyone at this point die at that intersection. However, that doesn't mean it's not a concern, because I have friends who live up there who sit there for 10 or 15 minutes. So if they're going to use shuttle buses, if they're going to do as they say, and they're going to come in with the privacy slats and do everything, and have people being shuttled back and forth, two things happen. We have people living up there who may be utilizing the restaurants in the area. So we have the hotel, but we also have the brewery that has food in it, that sort of thing. I think that's a positive for the neighborhood. I don't think it's going to, at least I don't believe it's going to infringe on the people that live there. However, they are concerned, I'm getting emails concerned about a secondary access for everyone up there at some point. And so as we go forward with the neighborhood plan, and we're talking about 8C, I don't think this is taking away from 8C, which tells us we're going to continue with the neighborhood plan. I think this is a temporary solution, and I really think that because it's going in an area that's easily serviced, it's going to be on a flat land, it's going to look well, and they're going to be able to get their people in, and it's going to be done quickly, get them in, get their work done. I'm supportive of this moving forward, and I think it's a good thing. However, I do have concerns, the same concerns that the neighbors do. What's this going to, long term, what's this going to be for us? And I don't think this takes away from the long term. I think a short term, 3 years, and I know that might not be short enough for some, but 3 years, we look at it, and I think it's a positive moving forward, where we now have dealt with the housing, workforce housing for people who are coming here. And my hope is that in addition to the people that are coming here, that they're using our local contractors and that sort of thing to get things done. So I'm going to stop going on. I think I'm supportive, and I've given my statement on that. Councillor?
Yeah, I think, really good valid points. I just think one thing for Councillor Rhines, as staff have made clear, they won't support 2 years. I don't think the resort is going to support 2 years. They won't support 2 years. But I think when you mention 3 years, I really think we need to be careful here. Of course, the legislation says 3, but we can't take away from the fact that maybe perhaps none of us are going to be here in 3 years because the election's in 2 years. There's quite absolute possibility that the next council could absolutely extend that for another 3 years. There's nothing stopping that. And I also think that it is just important to know, and I really hope we see that development permit for the staff housing. But when we were talking way back in the spring and fall of last year about the hotel and approval, we were told that that staff housing development permit was hopefully going to be at our table by the end of summer, early fall. And, you know, so things happen. I understand COVID, whatever. Yeah. But I just, it's just something to think about. But I really appreciate your comments on it.
Ms. Lowe.
Just something to know about that is that in 3 years, we will have the OCP neighborhood plan for Johnson Heights adopted. So when that, for at least that neighborhood plan, of course.
Fingers crossed.
So when that renewal comes forward, it will be evaluated under different policies and it will have a different decision-making qualities. So the ability for that renewal to happen will be much less. Because it's being analyzed under current policies right now, because that is what our planners have to do. They have to do it under the current OCP, which is actually a permitted use. That's why it is something that we can look at right now. But in 3 years, once that OCP vision and that neighborhood plan is in place, it's going to be a lot harder.
Yeah, and I think that's a really valid point, Ms. Lowe, and that's why I kind of struggle, because I go, well, I know that it allows it, but we're also hand in hand working on something right now that the residents have made clear isn't something they're going to want to see in that plan. So that's where I'm struggling, that we're kind of slipping it in before we get this all sorted, because once it is sorted, like you yourself and staff have stated, that it probably won't be something, or it'll be much harder to do, but we're just about there, so we're kind of slipping it in at the last minute, and I don't know. I really appreciate your comments.
In addition to those comments, so the property owner who has permitted us on their property does have the rezoning OCP amendment in place. With that, we don't anticipate that taking 3 years. So if there was a renewal, there would be new zoning on the property in addition to a Johnson Heights neighborhood plan. Okay. So right now, current regulations, those are in place, but that would be anticipated for the future.
Okay, so that makes it a little harder for them after the 3-year period. Okay.
It's also, through your worship, it's also the landowner's property, so they would have to allow them to be 3 additional years.
Okay, Ms. Ryan.
Yeah, so the first is, do we have the ability to amend this motion to restrict a renewal? Like, can we say it's 3 years, no renewal? I thought that was a thing, but maybe not. No?
Through your worship, no, the Local Government Act allows for a resident or for any property owner to apply for a renewal.
Okay.
And then through the same process as today, though, and we're going through the entire new review.
Gotcha.
Okay, good. Mr.
Your
Sunday.
Worship, just to add on to that, I will note that in staff's discussion with the applicant, the full expectation is that a renewal application will not be required and that this will be completed within the 3 years. And that is there's the premise that staff are currently working under.
Great, thank you for that comment. So, Ms. Ryan, we have a follow-up question, and then Councilor Elliott.
Yeah, so my other part of the question is, like in a perfect world, which we don't live in, but in a perfect world, RMR would build staff or employee housing, they put the construction workers there, they build their hotel. We know they're not going to do it in that order, but that would be awesome. But if we reduce the length of the temporary use permit, then you're at least pushing them a little bit in that direction, because that is just logical. Like, you need a place to put workers, you don't want to have to service a lot, and then you're going to have employee housing over here that could have housed them anyways. So why don't we just do this? We'll just put them in the house. Like, it just makes sense. I don't know why they wouldn't do that. And I think that we're encouraging them to do that, which is in the benefit of all community members, if we reduce the length of the temporary use permit. So my question is to you, is about why do you think we should not encourage them in that direction?
Well, I think if we give them the maximum of 3 years and something goes wrong, like COVID-19, then they've got a bit of a buffer. And that's kind of what I'm looking at. If they can get in and out in 2 years' time without us restricting it, I'm all for that. But if they've got that 3-year buffer, and that's the maximum term for the TUP, then I think That's what I'm looking at. Go ahead.
That's a good answer. I would just say in response, I'm going to paint another picture where they take 3 years to build their hotel, and then they come to us in 3 years and say, we're going to build staff housing now, so we need to extend this temporary use permit another 3 years so we can build you staff housing. And I don't want that to happen.
No, and I agree with you on that. And because when speaking with the proponents of RMR, and they were talking about putting in a foundation for the Heli Hotel, and then they get that started, and then they move their workers over to put in the foundation and do whatever they need to do for employee housing. Was that not their way of explaining what their plans were? And they've got a kind of a scenario that they need to stick to, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, yes, that is correct. The scheduling and the project management, again, is taken care of on the applicant side. We work with them to coordinate processing times for permits. Our goal is to get them out the door as soon as possible. But I will note there's a couple things. There's nothing that would restrict them from saying, we're done in 2 years, we're done in 2.5 years, we don't need it anymore. We can get our security back, which obviously they don't want, and move along. And there's also nothing that restricts them, especially if they do have available employees to complete these construction projects, to work on 2 things simultaneously. So they could be working on the hotel as well as the employee housing simultaneously, and that is the expectation, given how long these projects take, and that's where staff would be working on.
I hope that that's true, but you just never know, right? Expectations versus reality.
Sure. Any further comments on the motion on the table? Councillor Elliott?
I mean, the net result of this, you're going to have 60, 70 people up there, men, construction workers working in a camp next to a neighbor that may be not 100 meters, but they're 150 meters away. There's 90 homes that are there with young families and young people. That's the reality. Even though it's a trailer situation for Johnson Heights, there's still young families in there, and there's 70 guys over there who work in a construction site. And this is their livelihood. I'm not saying that that's going to be a wild neighborhood, but I've done the construction thing, and I know Friday afternoon it can't get rowdy. So that's reality. And I think the best option is a 2 and a 1-year option for renewal. I just think that gives us some clout, and it gives us some leverage on pushing that entity out of that once it's done. That's what I'll be supporting towards.
Thank you. Any further, Councillor?
Yeah, Your Worship, I think that's a really good point that Councillor Elliott makes, but I also think it's important to note that Ms. Wade clearly also indicated in the October meeting, so I'm assuming this is correct though, that she said that when questions were asked like what happens if there's policing concerns or noise concerns, that none of that can actually alter the temporary use permit. That would just have to be dealt with by the police, noise concerns. But say there were partying every single, hypothetically speaking, partying every single night, there was noise complaints, that will not give the council the power to withdraw that temporary use permit. It is there, and you deal with it.
That's great.
Yeah, and having said that, I mean, we start looking at RMR's ability to make sure that their staff are good corporate citizens. And you look at that and you say, you know what, they don't want the bad PR, that sort of thing. Mr. Simon.
Through your worship, I will note in our discussions with RMR, their intent is to always hire locally if possible. If not, there's going to be a mix of permanent employees, contractors, electricians that are going to be out there living in these quarters. In addition, they have their COVID safety plan, as is required. We are all living in that reality right now, which there are provincial recommendations also in terms of gatherings, and any other city bylaws with respect to causing a nuisance complaints would be enforced the same way they would in any other community or any other part of the city.
And I think you look at the people that are coming in to work, a lot of them are going to be family people. They're going to be going home on their days off. So, I want to temper that comment that Councillor Elliott made that, I get where you're coming from. Don't get me wrong. Been there, spent some time working with the RCMP, so I understand that. But, I want to look at this as what's on the table, temporary use permit, rather than weigh other things in. Councillor Juncker, you had your hand up.
Yeah, and just further to that, actually, because the Revelstoke RCMP is a very valid, they've commented actually in this report, which is pretty rare. and it actually talks about specifically regarding this project. They're suggesting that the operator of the temporary housing consider various security measures to decrease theft, vandalism at the site once in place. But nowhere else in the report does it really talk about, and I might have missed it, I did see something about possible security and then the fencing and the lighting as well. Is that what we're considering as those measures?
Mr.
Those are
Simon?
kind of the measures.
Through your worship, and Mr. Hartland can add on anything that's needed. There is a condition on the temporary use permit that is the SEPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, I believe is what the acronym's for, and that will be required on this site again to reduce the likelihood and mitigate the impacts that the RCMP is referring to there.
Okay, yeah, just wanted to clarify, because when I Googled temporary use permits the other night, it just came up with like the one up in the Chaco Lakes area and Chetwynd and the issues that were going on. So it was nice to see the RCMP commented on there.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to, is there any further comments on the motion that's on the table? Okay, so the motion on the table on number 1 is temporary use permit be approved for a 3-year period for the use of workforce housing. Councilor Ryan.
Yes. My comment is that I would only support this motion if the temporary use permit was reduced to 2 years.
Okay, sir, any further comment on that? Councilor O'Leary.
2 years with an option to renew for one.
Okay, so why not give 3 years to start with? And here's it. Go ahead, Ms. O'Leary.
Through your worship, putting a condition for an option for renewal for 1 year. Through the Local Government Act, the applicant is entitled to apply for a 3-year. And so in 2 years, they can make that application for 3 years. Council can then make a decision if they support it or not, or if they put it to 1 year, the application can be proposed for 3 years.
But can it be ended at 2?
This application is-
So if they apply for 3 and then they renew it to 2, is that right? They go into the final year
They
of
could
3.
apply to renew it for 2. I'm just saying that they have the option to apply 1, 2, or 3 years.
can't
through the
restrict
Local
it.
Government Act.
So if we start with 2 and then allow them to grow if they need it, but if we can't bring it back to 3. If we give them 3 to start, we can't bring it back. If it's a problem or if there's issues with that neighborhood, we can't pull it back from 3.
It would be for 3 years, and they would have to meet the conditions of their permit.
But if we gave them 2 and say, listen, if you do this right, we can give you a year extension, then we have control.
But what Ms. Hartley's saying is you can't just say we'll give you 1 more. They could, in 2 years, if
They
we give
apply
it
for another.
to, they could say we want 3 more.
Yeah, so they agree. But if we can say we will only give you
So Councilor, with all due respect, if you could address your comments to the chair so I can actually hear you. So you're suggesting 2 years, give them an option with 1 year. They can apply for 3 years. So I'm just going to put this out to you. In 2 years' time is an election. Do you want this to come up at the same time that you guys are applying to run again?
If we do,
If you do you want this to become an election issue in 2 years' time? I'm asking that question of all of you. I'm looking at it and saying, if you give them 3 years as they've asked, and they end up getting this done in 2 years, and I'm looking at this as they're going to be good corporate citizens, they're going to get their work done, they're going to build their staff housing, and they're going to move on, and we're going to be able to pull this forward, and the gentleman that owns the property is going to be able to do his subdivision because he's looking at that now as to how to move forward. I think that's the reason staff brought this to us. So, Councilor Ryan.
So I'm curious, through your worship, to ask staff what's involved in a renewal. Is it as intense as a process, or is it as simple as saying, you know what you're dealing with, you've dealt with it before, here's a report and an update, they just want an extension?
Through your worship, it's called a renewal, but it's actually a brand new application that goes through the exact same process that it has today.
Okay.
And so my question is, in 2 years' time, what's the possibility of Johnson Heights neighborhood plan being available and they're reapplying through a whole different process? It's a
Through
question.
your worship, the zoning over the property would be zoned for the proposed development that the landowner is going through rezoning, and then also the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan. So to say that you're going to renew it for another year may not be something that you can guarantee.
Perfect.
Okay.
that zoning is contingent on council approving that zoning.
Yeah.
Through your worship, staff's full expectation is that any application that's currently in the queue right now would have been considered by council within a 3-year period. Staff are working very diligently to reduce all processing timelines where available.
Okay. Councillor Shuttle.
I was just going to place the same concern that you had, that if we do this for 2 years and it becomes an election issue, that it just becomes...
Still very lightweight.
I'm sorry?
Can't talk. I said it's very well amazed.
Yeah.
Well, then why don't we do it on a 1-year basis? I know that that doesn't reduce processing time, but it at least gives us, this council sitting around this table, the opportunity to evaluate how is this working? How is the policing up there? Has it been a nightmare? We can ask the RCMP to report on the numbers of calls and complaints they've had. We can ask residents. Like, if this is something that's going to be impacting residents up there, I think it's worthwhile to not just give them 3 years and at least to put some urgency behind them building staff accommodation. That's really the goal.
Mr. Simon.
Through your worship and to the whole of council, I want council and the community to know that staff's goal of constructing staff accommodation is the same goal that council and the community has, right? When we start looking at the scheduling and the length that it takes to not only complete the staff housing, but all the infrastructure projects that are required to enable that full development concept, the water reservoir, the realignment of Camosi Road, there's a lot of work that's going to go into it. And as for the developers, they want a sense of certainty that the scheduling that they have put forward is going to be supported. If we are looking at potentially reducing the length of the temporary use permit, I will note for council that it does add some uncertainty into the process from a development performance perspective, and staff's expectation is that 3 years would be sufficient time to get the applications in place for employee housing, to initiate construction, and to have occupancy granted so that they can start housing employees on site.
That's fair. That's a good comment about the reservoir and having other things.
And so having that reservoir in place is going to be dependent, I mean, we need to have that in place before we can utilize these facilities that are being built. Is that correct?
Through your worship, again, a very technical engineering question, but I do know that the reservoir is a very key, critical piece of infrastructure to support all development on our lands. And staff and the Director of Engineering Public Works and the Director of Development Services have been working very diligently with the proponent to move this forward so that we can start seeing these development forms that are so needed by the community, chiefly being employee housing, start to come to fruition.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to go back to, I'm definitely satisfied with the 3-year term, and that way I know that they're going to get everything done, or at least close to it, so, and then be able to go back to their own employee housing. Any further comments on the motion on the table? Okay, so councilors, this is it. So I'm in favor of this. I'm going to ask all of you, all in favor? Opposed? So note that Councillor Charlotte and Mayor Sulz are in favor, and the other councillors are opposed to this, and that stops it at this point. It doesn't go any further. Is that correct, Ms. Will? Mr. Simon?
Could we, through your worship, it would be a procedural matter as to whether or not council is allowed to propose another resolution, given that the resolution that's on the floor
Okay,
is fixed.
so do you want to give another resolution for, or is it done?
No, Your Worship.
We could-
It's exactly as Paul described. If we stop right here, it's done.
Okay,
If council
so
proposes another resolution.
you want to, Council, you want to propose another resolution?
Yes, I would propose that we offer a 2-year temporary use permit with a 1-year renewal option. If
You can't define the renewal.
when there's your option to renew.
Yeah, option. They already get the option to renew.
Fair enough.
Okay, so 2 years?
I would second that.
You're seconding that? Is there any discussion on 2 years around the table? Councilor Juncker?
Here's a hypothetical question. So, say we approve 2 years, staff go back, because Mr. Simon has said staff are recommending against that.
Yep.
And go back to the resort and say, this is what council has passed, and they say, that doesn't work for us. can they then reapply again for a 3-year one? So they'll just, like, how does that work? Because if they go 2 years, it doesn't work, which is what staff have said, because they've indicated 2 years will not work, and council approves 2 years, what happens?
Through your worship, reapplication for the exact same development project is evaluated in accordance with our development procedures bylaw. And while I would have to double check the specifics of the bylaw, I do believe there is an interval of 6 months that the same application cannot be made if it has been proposed by council. And I will note that the resolution on the board that was for 3 years has failed. So going back to the applicant is dependent on how council chooses to proceed now moving forward.
Yeah, I'm just asking the hypotheticals of what happens.
They can't reapply for 3 months, or 6 months.
Yeah, Mr. Simon saying 6 months.
Yeah. Councillor Elliott?
Can we provide an indication to the proponent that we'd be in favor of extending it if they meet their requirements? If they adhere to what we set out, like a good neighbor, and adhere to the noise and the side effects that might come from this, it diminish.
You mean prior to the 2 years being up?
After the 2 years.
Okay, are you going to be on council in 2 years?
I don't know. But
And so that's the reality. With all due respect, Councillor Elliott, that's the reality, because the election may come at the time where this is coming up. And so whether it's this council who gets to do the renewal prior to the election, or whether it's after, will be dependent on when the election is. And then you'll have to look at that. They have the option of renewing. If you pass today, 2 years, they have the option of renewing, and maybe at that time they'll know for sure whether they need 1 year or 2 years or whatever, and they can bring that to the council of the day to determine that. But, so do you need to say, or would you like to say something, Mr. Simon, prior to me asking a question on this motion?
Through your worship, not anything to add. It would be a new application, as Ms. Hartling had indicated. Staff would come forward with our recommendation at that period based on current policy for any renewal application that may be required.
So typically, at that application, you would say, how long do you think you'll need? And you'll say, well, I need 6 more months or a year to complete. And you would evaluate that if that's important, or if that's relevant, or if that's achievable, and then make your recommendation to the council of the day. Is that correct?
Through your worship, for all planning applications, staff evaluate it based on current policy that is adopted by council. That is our main function as planners, to evaluate it based on the overarching policy.
So it would be blatantly ridiculous, preposterous for the council of the day to say, listen, they've got 6 months to go, uproot the camp and get out of that space and just go, okay, come back with a new proposal. Because you only need 6 months to complete, and we're going to make you move to a new site.
You're speaking in hypothetics, though.
Yeah, so let's not even go down there. Let's not go down there.
So that's what you're saying we're putting in place.
We're putting in place a motion for 2 years.
No, we're talking about the existing, extending it a year. You're saying, is that feasible? And I'm saying that would be ridiculous for the council, whoever's elected, unless they're a bad neighbor. Okay, maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, I'm guessing that they have to apply for this renewal before their date expired.
Of course.
I mean, they would do it before the end. So if this was approved today for 2 years and it's October 27th, probably they wouldn't leave 10 days or whatever. So it most likely would be us voting on that. I just wanted to say that.
Okay. Any other further discussion on the motion on the table? 2-year term on item number 1. Ms. Lowe.
Can I just get clarification? So the only thing that we're changing in the resolution is from a 3-year to a 2-year,
That's correct.
correct?
You had also mentioned wanting to paint them and require
Yeah, I'm going to get to that. Item number 3, that's not even on there yet.
Perfect.
Okay, Mr. Simon.
Through your worship, we did update the resolution to put on board here, just to make sure that this reflects what the discussion council is.
Because he's just so fast.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's the resolution that we were talking about. So, any further discussion on the motion that's on the table for a 2-year term? Everything else stays the same. Councillor Charlotte.
Point of order, who moved and seconded that?
Councillor Elliott.
Councillor Elliott moved it. Councillor Ron seconded it.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion on the table? All those in favor of a 2-year term? Okay, those opposed? Note that Councillor Brooks Hill, Councillor Juncker are opposed. Mayor Sulz is joining the other three councillors in favor. This motion passes. Thank you. We're moving on to item number 2. That development permit DP 2020 be approved for form and character. Do you want to say anything further, Ms. Hartling, on that?
No, Your Worship.
Okay, so that's straightforward to Councillor. Someone want to put that on the table for me? Councillor Charlotte?
The development permit DP 2020-04 be approved for form and character to construct workforce housing consisting of 5 prefabricated or modular accommodation structures with parking and landscaping 1121 Johnson Way, as in the package on the screen.
All right, and this is item number 3 that I'm going to put resolution number 3, or can I include this in actual number 2?
It falls under this.
Number 2.
Number 2, okay, so we're going to go on with number 2. I'm going to ask for painting on item number 3, which isn't on your agenda.
And you
Okay,
had said trees and stuff too, you mentioned more.
Yeah.
Well, it's, the original landscape is on there, but Your Worship, you stood up and said extra.
Well, I'd like to see more around
That's what I mean.
around the area from the.
That's what I'm clarifying, because the landscaping plan's in here, but you stood up and said you want to see extra landscape.
And so we'll discuss that in a minute. Let's go on with number 2. Any further discussion on this as in your package?
Well, are we voting on? There's only number 2.
That's because there's going to be an introduced one. Okay, so I don't want to make it confusing for you.
Your Worship? Already confused. So what we're going to do for number 2, because it's to do with the development permit and the form and character, you are going to add a B that you would like to see the units painted in a color that is neutral.
Yep, permits being amended to require the owner to paint the exterior of all accommodation structures neutral earth tones to minimize the visual impact from adjacent properties and roadways. And I would like to see some extra shrubs or something along that north side from the pub. Can I ask for that?
Sorry, through Your Worship, along Oak Drive or behind the site?
Long Oak Drive, where you look, if you're looking over at the brewery, looking over, I want them to be able to see shrubs as well as just the chain link fence. That's what I'm asking for. Can that be done?
So, through Your Worship, there is landscaping provisions in place. If you like to include enhanced landscaping provisions beyond what's provided, that would be a decision for council to decide whether or not they want to amend your.
Yeah, I'd like to see some enhanced just along, sorry, Ms. Harding.
So the landscaping that they proposed is within the fenced area. Are you proposing landscaping along the exterior of the fenced area?
No, I'm thinking about inside. So basically, you're going to see the chain link fence, and inside it's going to have some sort of landscaping in there so that, whether it extends along here or whatever, in a way that meets their needs. I don't want them to, they've already got a plan for where garbage goes. I don't want them to have to put shrubs in there. Do you know what I mean? So that's kind of what I'm looking at.
The shrubs, if they're inside the chain link fence.
Well, it's actually going to look a little better because I'm expecting them to be decent-sized shrubs.
It's not chain link. It says in there it's got that black stuff, so you can't see in at all.
Well, it's chain link with slats in it. That's how they achieve it.
Yeah, but like the chain link with slats over on, just by my work, you can't see in. It's got the black slot. You can't see.
Okay, so then the landscaping on the outside, so that it kind of softens that chain link fence. Can we do it, Mr. Simon?
Through Your Worship, with the resolution that you are proposing with respect to the repainting, if we want to add in there and that the applicant provides an enhanced landscape plan, then staff can evaluate based on our professional discretion and experience to make sure that we are improving the aesthetics of the site as per the intent of council.
Perfect. And that way I don't have to be micromanaging that. Okay, Councilor Ryan, you have a question?
That sounds great. I do, though, have one question. It says that the site has to be returned to its original state. Does that mean all these shrubs are just going to be pulled out in 2 years?
Through Your Worship, if the landowner does not want them on the site, yes.
Okay, so it's up to the landlord.
Or staff discretion. So we have the discretion to look at the site to make sure it's been gone back to its original state. If there are some shrubs that enhance the property, That would be up to the landowner's discretion.
Okay.
Because it is their property.
Perfect.
Through your worship, just add on that we're talking about two different securities here, one for the landscaping itself to make sure it gets completed as per council direction, and the other one for specifically the removal of the buildings to return it to its pre-state to give assurance to the community and council and staff that work will be undertaken at conclusion.
Okay, great. So is it as clear as mud as to what we're doing here? Are we doing it all in one motion? We're going to vote one time, or we're voting twice? Just once. All right. Okay, any further discussion on this motion? Sorry, it gets confusing after a bit. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Juncker and Councillor Brooke-Hiller was opposed, and Mayor Sulz is joining other councils in approving. Thank you both for your diligence, Mr. Simon, Ms. Hartley, much appreciated.
Can you just announce the two so that they can...
Yeah, so I'm just going to do a quick announcement, and then we're going to take a break. Gentlemen, so first of all, I want to congratulate Councillor Juncker and his partner Britt on the birth of their baby girl. Congratulations. It's an awesome thing to bring a child into the world, and definitely we're going to see you changing diapers and doing all kinds of things, so that's awesome.
Thank you.
So at the back of the room, we have our new Sergeant of the RCMP, Sergeant Christotz, if you'd stand, and our new Fire Chief Stephen DeRose. Gentlemen, if you'd stand, thank you for coming to Revelstoke. Congratulations on being here. We look forward to working with you, and we really appreciate the fact that you want to be in our community. I both have seen both of you over the past few weeks in work situations. I am so impressed. Thank you for being here, and I know that our community is better for having you here. So thank you again. Appreciate you being here. Yes, thank you for sitting through 3 hours. So the only other thing that I want to just mention is our roundabout is going to open 9 a.m. Thursday morning. At least we're doing the ribbon cutting, and hopefully everything else will be in fine tune. Did I say something I wasn't supposed to? No. Okay, so now I've publicized it. Anyway, I'm inviting council to that, and weather dependent. Again, I've been chewed because of that. So we want to just take a couple minutes. Some of you need to use the washroom. Okay, and then we actually need to resolve into in camera here, and then we're going to take a break, and then we will come back and visit this. So, someone want to make a motion to go in camera?
What is it, why? Financing section.
Assume that I gotta find it here. Because we have somebody online that's going to. So I want to go in camera pursuant to section 90.1 C and G of the Community Charter. If someone want to make that motion, Councillor Ryan, Councillor Brooks Hill, all in favor, motion's carried. You can take a couple minute break.